Chapter 21. You're harassing me. Tony stepped into the Stark Industries lobby elevator just as Damien caught up with him. Tony, Damien asked, what did you and Mr. Coulson talk about? Tony tapped the elevator call button with a casual air. Oh, nothing major. Just went over Project Blue Star's current status and where we're headed. Damien frowned, unconvinced. He'd seen Coulson leave the first floor and then watched Tony head straight for the basement. Tony's offhand reply didn't satisfy him. Just the future of Blue Star? He pressed. You're not hiding anything? Tony gave a half shrug. Honestly, that's it. Look, after seeing the God of Death in person, I'm still wrapping my head around everything. Explaining it all to you now would take ages, and I'd end up telling you not to stick your neck out on the field. He punched the button again, more forcefully this time. Undeterred, Damien fell into step beside him. Tony shot him an exasperated glance. He knew how to handle curious civilians, a bit of good-natured ribbing. Save the debrief for Nick Fury, Tony said. I've got work waiting. Damien gripped the elevator rail. So you can't give me the full story, but you can tell me to buzz off? More or less, Tony admitted, rolling his shoulders. The doors closed, and the car began its descent. Their banter echoed softly in the shaft as Tony dodged Damien's questions with playful jabs, both of them well aware that, underneath the bickering, Damien was never going to let this go. Chapter 1. The Other Side. Last night, Damien Ambaraka received an unexpected message from Tony Stark. Damien already knew Stark well. He'd been instrumental in driving Obadiah Stane out of the picture, and without Stane's scheming, no one else could produce a functioning arc reactor anytime soon. In Damien's world, that should have meant a period of calm. But New York never stays still, and neither does Tony Stark. The moment Stark discovered he could reach Damien through the dark web, he wouldn't rest until he'd secured a meeting. Damien didn't answer the call, not because he was busy, but because he didn't want to endure Stark's inevitable swagger. Yes, Stark had changed. He'd softened, become a devoted philanthropist and champion of the powerless. Yet beneath that newfound generosity burned the same old arrogance, the same careless tongue that left a trail of bruised egos in its wake. So Damien sat back, coffee in hand, watching the encrypted notification blink on his screen. If Stark really had something pressing to discuss, he would try again. And knowing Tony Stark, that wouldn't be long. Until then, Damien let the city's restless pulse fill the silence, far preferable to enduring another lecture in self-congratulation. Damien lounged in the plush lobby of the Heroes' Hall, dressed casually in a short-sleeved t-shirt and athletic shorts, his gaze fixed on the enormous display screen in front of him. He was only days away from celebrating his 22nd birthday in the Marvel world, a milestone he expected to spend exactly as he had every other, entirely alone. Friendships had never been part of his life plan. Born into poverty as an orphan of Asian descent, Damien had suffered every variety of neglect and bullying. He'd long since decided that people only ever let you down or got in your way. Ever since the system had awakened within him, granting him abilities no one could match, his public persona had become the legendary Diamond King, respected and envied by thousands. But respect wasn't friendship, and envy wasn't companionship. If making friends meant catering to others, he'd rather keep his distance. His weekly routine was simple: 5 days of intensive training, followed by 2 precious days off. On rest days, Damien indulged himself in the things he truly enjoyed, sampling the finest street food vendors scattered throughout the city, or retreating to his private suite to dive into his other world, gaming. He'd mastered every genre he could get his hands on: high-speed racing simulations, tense MOBAs, precision Dre, Ven FPS titles. None required small talk or emotional labor, just pure, unbroken focus and the exhilarating rush of victory. As the lobby's lights dimmed to signal the next match loading on the screen, Damien cracked his knuckles and leaned forward. In here, at least, everything was under his control, and that was all the friendship he ever needed. Damien's exceptional physique and razor-sharp senses made him a target of suspicion every time he joined a ranked match. Opponents were quick to report him for cheating, and his accounts kept getting banned. Too indifferent to waste time arguing with the game masters, Damien eventually abandoned competitive play altogether and turned to casual titles, pet-raising sims, virtual farms, that sort of thing. These games didn't demand daily logins, fit neatly into his habit of playing a few hours a week, and offered a relaxed way to unwind. Each morning, Damien would spend about an hour knocking out all his daily quests across several games. He'd swap tips with fellow players now and then, earning a little in-game currency and occasionally even some real money by sharing his strategies. Once his gaming session was done, he'd head out into the wild to hunt for meals. Thanks to the 5 meals a day system, Damien easily accumulated over 100,000 evolution points daily. Tracking down prey bred from stronger animals yielded even more points, helping him climb the evolutionary ladder faster. Wine, by contrast, granted virtually no evolution points. It was simply a social indulgence, so he rarely bothered seeking it out. Damien had endless ways to stockpile evolution points whenever he wanted. On his most generous days, or on those when he pushed himself to the limit, he could rack up 100 evolutions in a single week without breaking a sweat. Today he'd taken the Maserati out for a spin, the engine's purr matching the hum of his thoughts. He couldn't help but wonder when Tony Stark would announce his next big gala or tech expo. Any event would do, so he could slip in, schmooze with the caterers, and help himself to a gourmet meal. And so the days slipped by, each one folding neatly into the next. A month vanished almost as quickly as it had arrived. Tony Stark, clad in his armored suit, made several trips to Afghanistan on the trail of the 10 Rings. After an intense campaign, Iron Man finally dismantled the terrorist cell and freed the people of Gumila from a nightmare they'd endured for far too long. Across allied nations, and at home in the United States, the legend of Iron Man spread like wildfire. In Gumila, he was a bona fide hero. In America, however, whispers circulated that this marvel of engineering must have come straight from Stark Industries' labs. After all, no one else in the country even had the capability to build something so extraordinary. Facing relentless scrutiny and swirling rumors, Damien Stark decided it was time to end the speculation once and for all. He summoned the world's press to a live broadcast, cameras rolling from every corner. Calmly, he looked into the lenses and said, "I am Iron Man." In that instant, the identity of the armored hero became public knowledge, and the reaction was electric. Across the United States, people cheered, gasped, and raced to social media to declare their loyalty to the man behind the suit. But Damien's bold confession carried consequences. Within days, the National Council issued a formal summons demanding that he hand over Iron Man's proprietary arc reactor technology for the greater good of national security. Many would have been cowed by such pressure. After all, the Council wielded immense authority. Yet Damien Stark was no ordinary citizen. A world-renowned engineering genius, former arms magnate, and proud taxpayer, he refused to be bullied by political power plays. In a firm, public answer, he declined their request, then turned on his heel and walked away. Far from hurting his standing, the showdown only magnified his legend. He returned to his opulent manor amid a chorus of newfound admirers. 1 month later, after sharing a quiet dinner with his closest confidants, Damien descended the grand staircase and entered his private lab. With a casual wave to his assistants, he issued a single command: "Let's get back to work." And so Iron Man's future and the battle over his genius began anew. Jarvis's tone was calm, almost casual. "Sir, connecting you to Damien Ambalaka now. Thank you." For weeks, no months, this had been their ritual. Every day, Tony Stark told Jarvis to place the same call to the same man, only to be stonewalled. Jarvis didn't much question it anymore. He navigated the network, crossed firewalls, and finally, this time, it went through. On the other end, a cool, clipped voice answered, "Mr. Stark, you've been calling me every day for a month. Are you aware that qualifies as harassment?" Tony, who'd been about to dive into his latest schematics, paused. "My phone and tablet serve more purposes than just blocking your calls." He leaned back, momentarily halted by Damien's curt greeting. From his end, Jarvis queried in a neutral register, "Sir, does this constitute harassment under the policy definitions?" Tony hesitated, then admitted, "In a sense, yes." Silence followed as Jarvis weighed his next move. Truthful? Diplomatic? Finally, he chose the latter. Under legal guidelines, repeated unsolicited calls can be deemed harassment. You may wish to consider alternative channels of communication. Before Tony could respond, Jarvis sent his second update back to the workshop console. Status: connection established. Subject: Damien Ambalaka has confirmed receipt and lodged a harassment complaint, advising course of action. Tony ran a hand through his hair. Very well, Jarvis. Let him cool off. I'll send a formal request by encrypted mail. Understood, sir, Jarvis replied, closing the channel. Another day, another delicate negotiation, and the ever-unseen assistant kept everything running smoothly, no matter how many times the call went unanswered. Chapter 22. Friends Who Understand. Damien's phone buzzed on the desk. He pressed it to his ear, and after a couple of rings, Tony Stark's familiar voice crackled through. You still won't listen to me, Tony said, equal parts exasperated and amused. Seriously, what do you want? Leaning back, Damien smirked. I told you, your surprise summons don't exactly fit my schedule. Why should I drop everything this time? Tony ran a hand through his hair. Fair enough, but hear me out. I've been tinkering non-stop, and I've finally got something worth showing you. Damien raised an eyebrow. Oh, like what? Remember my Mark II suit? Well, that's old news. I'm on Mark V now. Bigger power boost, sleeker targeting, way more maneuverable. You've got to see it in action. A grin split Damien's face. Okay, I'm intrigued, but if you're going to wow me with bleeding-edge tech, I'll need snacks. Tony laughed. No problem. FRIDAY. It's already queued up refreshments. Perfect. Damien stood and grabbed his jacket. I'll be there in 20. Can't wait, Tony replied. See you soon. Hanging up, Damien felt that familiar spark of excitement. In Tony's lab, surrounded by gleaming armor prototypes, he knew he'd found a friend who truly understood him. Food? Damien asked. Tony Stark, who'd been daydreaming at his desk, snapped to attention. Damien Ambalaka, I hardly ever invite people into my home. Oh, you invited me, and your first question is whether there's dinner? Damien sounded amused, as though this were perfectly reasonable. Tony bristled at the implication, but then recalled a whispered rumor among New York's elite. Damien Ambalaka had a bottomless appetite. He'd even watched the man demolish plate after plate at Stark's own charity ball a month earlier. Swallowing his pride, Tony cleared his throat. Right, of course. Jarvis, order dinner for 100 people. I'll be there in, let's say, 40 minutes. Very good, sir, came Jarvis's calm reply. Damien didn't hesitate. Perfect. I'll see you soon. With that, he hung up the phone, slipped out of his jacket, changed into a casual leather bomber, and slid behind the wheel of his sleek black sports car. Moments later, Tony pressed a button on his console. Jarvis, did I hear that correctly? You did, sir, the AI responded. Mr. Ambalaka requested dinner for 100 guests. Tony pinched the bridge of his nose. 100 guests, right. He smirked. Well, if he's coming hungry, we'd better be ready. Jarvis, get in touch with the culinary team at the 5-star hotel, Tony said, folding his arms. Ask them to prepare Damien's meal right away and arrange for the fastest possible delivery. Understood, sir, Jarvis replied. Shall I include expedited fees? Absolutely. On top of the cost of the vegetables, add a $5,000 rush fee for each chef involved. Tony paused for a moment, watching the lights on his desk console blink in acknowledgement. He didn't just want to impress Damien with lavish hospitality. He also hoped to learn more about the new recruit's perspective on the Avengers. And who knew? Maybe Damien already had inside knowledge about extraterrestrials. As far as Tony knew, the boy's background was still largely a mystery. Leaving the lab behind, Tony descended to the living room on the first floor. He sank onto the sofa just as Pepper Potts appeared in the doorway. What's going on? She asked, concern flickering across her face. You just popped up here? Everything all right? Tony waved her off with a half-smile. I'm fine. I just want to sit for a bit and think. Pepper studied him for a moment, then settled into an armchair across from him. If you say so, she replied softly. Tony leaned back. Let's just wait for Damien's dinner and talk a little about the Avengers, maybe even aliens. I have a feeling our new recruit might surprise us. Pepper Potts paused in the doorway of Tony Stark's workshop. Jarvis? The soft hum of the AI filled the room. Sir is expecting a guest, Miss Potts. Tony didn't bother looking up from his workbench. A guest? Who? Jarvis replied. His name is Damien Ambalaka. He's en route now. Pepper exchanged a curious glance with Tony. Damien Ambalaka? I didn't realize you'd struck up a friendship. They met just this month, Jarvis explained. Pepper tapped her earpiece. All right, Damien's arriving as our honored guest. There'll be several catering deliveries shortly. Please make sure someone's here to receive them. Tony waved a hand dismissively. Don't worry about it. We've got it covered. Pepper turned on her heel, still mulling over the unexpected visitor as she headed off to coordinate the catering. Pepper paused at the serving hatch, eyeing the steaming platters. Didn't he just have dinner a little while ago? She asked. Jarvis's calm voice replied, Yes, but the dinner staff insisted on preparing more for Mr. Damien Ambalaka. His appetite is exceptional. Pepper frowned. Are the stories true? That he can out-eat anyone on the planet? Indeed, Jarvis confirmed. No competitive eater comes close to matching Mr. Ambalaka's capacity. Surprised, Pepper shook her head. I don't understand how one person can eat so much. Still, the rumors were right. Jarvis simply acknowledged her amazement as the two fell into an easy conversation. Time slipped by, and 20 minutes later the intercom chimed. Sir, Mr. Damien Ambalaka has arrived at the manor gates, Jarvis announced. Open the door, Pepper said, and the villa's entrance slid aside with a soft hiss. Damien stepped into the foyer as if he'd done it 1,000 times before, effortlessly confident in a crisp white suit. Pepper's breath caught. She was used to seeing handsome faces in the city, but few looked quite like him. Tall, impeccably groomed, and strikingly Asian in features she rarely encountered. For a moment, she just stared. Jarvis's voice cut through her surprise. Shall I announce you, Miss Pepper? She gave him a quick nod, her mind still turning over the unexpected sight of Mr. Ambalaka in the flesh. Although Pepper had seen Damien Ambalaka around Stark Industries before, it was always at a distance, just two faces passing in the corridor. Their paths never truly crossed, so she seldom gave him any thought. Today, however, Damien had come to visit Tony Stark in person, and his unexpected arrival left Pepper momentarily flustered. After all, who could resist a handsome, fresh-faced young man? A soft cough at her shoulder snapped Pepper back to reality. She turned to find Damien standing there, calm and polite. Good morning, Miss Potts, he greeted. Pepper dipped her head, then lifted it with a professional smile. Good morning, Mr. Ambalaka. Damien nodded. Shall we go downstairs and chat? At that moment, Tony emerged from his office. He spotted Damien, stood up, and motioned with a thumb over his shoulder. Right this way, Ambalaka. Damien glanced back at Pepper, his expression thoughtful, then gave a quick nod. Pepper, unless I ask, there's no need to bring us coffee. We'll be back as soon as we're done. Tony shot Damien a discreet glance as they headed toward the stairs. And make sure she doesn't find out what we're up to, he added under his breath. Pepper noticed Tony's mischievous look and felt her curiosity spike, but she kept her obedience. Understood, she murmured, watching them disappear. Alone in the office, Pepper wondered what secret meeting awaited downstairs. Whatever it was, she'd been strictly forbidden to ask questions, and that only made her more anxious to find out. Damien fell into step beside Tony Stark as they headed for the stairs. Looks like the new technology isn't the only reason I wanted to talk, he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. You've already guessed what's on my mind, and you know it's not something she can really grasp. Tony paused mid-step, an expression of mild exasperation crossing his face. It's not that she can't understand, he replied slowly. She understands the facts, but not you. Damien glanced over at Pepper, who was watching them with polite, curious eye. Then back at Tony, who still seemed to be turning Damien's meaning over in his head. It's not just her, Damien went on. A lot of people might feel the same way. That's why I brought you down here. Tony nodded and let out a soft sigh. All right, let me hear it. Damien's lips curved into a satisfied smile. Jarvis, he said, lowering his voice so that only the AI could hear. You know, those two really do hit it off. Pepper couldn't catch the words, but she saw the easy camaraderie between Damien and Tony, and how, before they even reached the underground lab, they were already deep in conversation. Jarvis spoke with a note of pride in his voice. My master may not be good at showing his feelings, but you can trust my judgment. He barely knew Damien Ambalaka, yet Damien had succeeded in persuading Tony Stark to call and stay in touch every single day for a month. That alone spoke volumes about the connection they shared. Chapter 23, Tony's Light Bulb. Damien followed Tony Stark down the spiral staircase into the bowels of the facility. The moment he stepped inside the underground lab, he He felt like he'd walked onto a sci-fi movie set. Everywhere he looked, floating holograms and stereoscopic projections danced in midair. Star charts, molecular models, even a full-size replica of an alien spacecraft schematic. Damien had only ever seen effects like this on screens. Now, he was standing among them. Tony turned from a workbench cluttered with arc reactors and experimental devices. He studied Damien with a wry grin. "Damien Ambalaka," he said, tapping the air and collapsing a 3D asteroid belt. "You've got that look, like you already know how all this works." Damien met his gaze evenly. "I've done my homework. Speaking of which, ever hear of aliens?" Tony raised an eyebrow as he strode over. "Aliens, huh? I know more than most. If you've got questions, fire away." A spark ignited in Damien's eyes. "All right, then. How much do you know about them?" Tony paused, weighing his words. "Let's say I've gathered enough intel to make a difference. For the record, I'll answer 3 questions. No more, no less." "That sounds fair," Damien said, folding his arms. "So which 3 questions are you prepared to answer?" Tony chuckled and waved toward a row of sleek, high-backed chairs. "Why don't you sit down and decide? I've got coffee brewing, and I'm curious which mysteries you want to dig into." Damien chose a chair, settling into it with casual confidence. He gave Tony a slow, knowing smile, a reminder that he wasn't just any visitor snooping around Stark's secrets. As Tony moved to pour 2 mugs, he couldn't shake the sense that Damien already held more pieces of the puzzle than he was letting on. And so their conversation, 3 questions at a time, began. Tony Stark leaned back in his chair and studied the young man across the table. "Coulson told me Blue Star is in serious trouble. Is that true?" Damien met his gaze without hesitation. "Not right now, but give it a few years, and things will get dangerous." Tony's brow furrowed. "A few years is pretty vague. Can you be more specific?" Damien offered a faint smile. "Would knowing the exact year change what you need to do? You already know the threat is coming. That should be enough to start preparing." Tony's heart hammered in his chest. He had only 2 questions left, and one had just slipped away. He forced himself to refocus. "All right. Second question. Are there any alien races out there who might stand with us, become true allies of humanity?" Damien's expression grew thoughtful. "Yes, there are, but they're cautious. They've watched Earth for centuries, weighing our potential both as partners and as a risk." "And how do we reach them?" Tony pressed. "That," Damien said softly, "is the real challenge." He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "You'll need more than just technology. You'll need trust and a demonstration that we're ready to earn it. In the Celestial Empire, there's an old saying, 'Those who aren't of my people must harbor different hearts.' It isn't uncommon for humanity to fall into endless conflict simply because of the color of one another's skin or the shape of their eyes. But tell me this, when do you think all of mankind will finally put aside those differences and stand together as allies?" Damien paused, letting the question hang in the air. "When we have a common enemy," he replied softly. Tony Stark regarded him thoughtfully. "Exactly. Until there's a threat powerful enough to force everyone to unite, alliances, or the lack of them, mean very little. You'll see what I mean when that enemy appears." Damien raised an eyebrow. "So, when will that happen?" "If nothing else interferes," Tony said, leaning back, "you'll be fighting side by side with every race in the galaxy in about 9 years. That's when the real danger shows up, and that's when unity will no longer be a choice, but a necessity." Damien absorbed the prediction in silence. Then, after a moment, he spoke again. 9 years from now, 2017. Who are you, Damien Ambalaka, and how do you know what's coming in the future? If this enemy is truly that powerful, why aren't you at least a little afraid? Tony Stark's voice was edged with skepticism as he stared at Damien, who just pinpointed the exact year that a universe-threatening force would emerge. Damien simply tilted his head and smiled. "My identity isn't your concern," Damien said evenly. He paused, as if considering Tony's next question. "And why am I not afraid? Because the only thing I truly fear is being powerless to stop what's coming. Worrying won't change fate." He spread his hands in a casual shrug. Of course he was terrified at the thought of facing Thanos, who wouldn't be? But this fear was temporary. Damien had a plan. If Thanos proved unbeatable in this universe, he'd simply leap to another. With each jump, he could absorb more hero templates, is growing stronger until no foe could match him. If escape became necessary, he'd escape. If confrontation was possible, he'd be ready. Tony's eyes narrowed. He could see the conviction in Damien's expression, the same conviction that had drawn him, against all instincts, to trust this stranger from the future. Though he still bristled at unanswered questions, a part of him couldn't deny the spark of hope Damien's words ignited. And that, Damien reflected, was exactly what he needed. Damien folded his arms and fixed Tony Stark with a steady gaze. "I've answered 2 of your questions. You get one last chance." Tony leaned back in his chair, eyes glittering with challenge. "All right, after this, it's on you whether I get another answer." Damien offered a small, almost playful nod. He wasn't speaking as the Grim Reaper or some cryptic entity. He was Damien, and he wanted Tony curious. He knew Tony Stark was a man cursed by knowledge. The more he learned, the more compelled he felt to act. So Damien decided to feed him just enough information to keep him engaged. "Agent Coulson told me you'd been approached by someone with superpowers," Damien said. Tony's brow lifted. "Is that so?" Damien inclined his head. "Yes, and while we're at it, I want you to join the Avengers." Tony Stark's expression flickered between amusement and genuine interest. "Then why didn't you?" Silence stretched between them for a heartbeat before Tony spoke again, voice quiet but firm. "Are you sure that's your last question?" Damien's surprise was audible. "Just answer mine first." Tony studied him for a long moment, then leaned forward and tapped the table with his fingertips. "All right, I've learned enough, for now. Whether what you've told me is true or not, time will tell." With that, the conversation ended, leaving both men to wonder what revelations the future might hold. Damien folded his arms, eyes narrowing as he spoke. "I know Nick Fury's plan for the Avengers started with noble intentions, but history shows how quickly good ideas get twisted. In the end, they become another political weapon, and I'm not interested in answering to any government official. I make my own choices, which is why I refuse to sign on." Tony Stark regarded him coolly. "You really think there's no way to work with political oversight? You just need to learn how to navigate orders, how to pick your battles." Damien shrugged. "Save it, Stark. I'm not looking for a lecture, and I'm certainly not recruiting you. We're sitting here as equals. No grudges, no agendas." Tony gave a dismissive chuckle. "Fine by me. Just don't overestimate yourself. If you bite off more than you can chew, the fallout won't be pretty." Damien met Tony's gaze without flinching. He knew the man was cursed and blessed by genius, always 3 steps ahead, always hard to read. Maybe Tony wasn't moved by the idea of defending the entire planet, but he'd never hesitate to protect the people he cared about. And that, Damien decided, was enough to earn his respect. Tony Stark's mind raced with possibilities. Ever since that glimpse of a fraught future, he'd been obsessively crafting contingency plans. Every ally, no matter how powerful, was now also a potential liability if the timeline shifted against them. He hadn't even officially joined the Avengers yet, but the weight of his secret pressed on him like a ticking clock. All he wanted was someone to share the burden, a trusted partner to stand beside him when the time came. That's why he'd approached Damien Ambalaka with an offer to join the team. To Tony, it wasn't just about gaining another hero, it was about forging an alliance strong enough to face whatever storms lay ahead. Maybe Damien would understand why keeping this secret alone was a risk Tony was no longer willing to take. Damien, however, had made it clear he couldn't become an Avenger. As Tony watched Damien's expression shift from polite amusement to steely reserve, a chill ran down his spine. The easy camaraderie he'd hoped for dissolved in an instant. Tony took a steadying breath. "All right," he said quietly, forcing a small smile. "I won't push you. I was out of line." He held up his hand in apology. "I'm sorry. Please, don't look at me like that." Damien Ambalaka stared after Tony Stark's retreating figure, realizing that the mystery surrounding him ran far deeper than he'd ever guessed. At first, Damien had planned to recruit Tony to convince him to fight on his side, but the notion now felt reckless. Tony paused at the door, then turned back. "About what I told you, aliens, the future. Feel free to mention it if you must. Just don't expose me. I can't have my quiet life upended." Damien nodded, sensing Tony's relief at dropping the subject. "Don't worry," he said. I won't go spilling secrets. I'm barely able to believe myself. If your timeline holds true, in 9 years we'll face an enemy we can't even imagine. At this point, I'm almost wishing I knew less. Tony sank into a nearby chair and let out a slow sigh. He'd built the armored suit to protect himself, and in the process had crossed paths with that inscrutable being they called death. Learning its nature had blasted open a door to an entirely new world, one that remained entirely hidden from everyone else. As the two men sat in the quiet workshop, Tony finally met Damien's gaze. "You sure you don't want in?" he asked softly. Damien offered a small, rueful smile. "Not right now," he replied. "Maybe someday. But for now, let's keep this between us." Outside, the afternoon light fell across scattered blueprints and metal plates, a reminder that the war to come had already begun, even if the rest of the world still slept on. There's no point in worrying. A crisis won't arrive simply because you fret about it. Tony Stark didn't even look up. And you still have 9 years. With that brain of yours, you ought to pull off more than a few miracles in 9 years, right? Damien watched him slump in his chair like a salted fish and shook his head. 9 years? I'd kill for that kind of lifespan. Hearing 9 years only drove Tony deeper into despair. He shot Damien a bitter look. "You mean your light bulb, the very thing that's poisoning you?" Damien's eyes glittered as he glanced over. "Light bulb? You actually call the arc reactor a light bulb? Do you have any idea what it means to crystallize technology and genius into a single device?" Tony had been on the brink of giving in to gloom, but the moment Damien belittled his life's work, he straightened up as if struck by lightning, ready to argue, to reason, to defend every precious watt of it. Chapter 24. Treating Tony. Damien leaned against the workbench, watching Tony Stark pace in restless circles. He couldn't resist a grin. Honestly, if you ignore what it does, it really just looks like a big light bulb. Tony paused, shot Damien a mock glare, then laughed in exasperation. "Right, ignore the most powerful personal energy source ever invented and critique the lampshade." He paused, noticing Damien's easy confidence. "Well, thanks, I guess, for trying to lighten the mood." Damien shrugged. "Anytime." Tony took a steadying breath and pushed his shirt open to reveal the arc reactor embedded in his chest. Its steady blue glow filled the lab with an eerie calm. "But you're right, this thing is starting to mess with my system." He traced a finger along the reactor's casing. "I've tried swapping out the palladium core for other elements. Nothing gives the same output without causing new complications." His voice faltered as he stared at the pulsing light. "If I keep running it on palladium poisoning will kill me, sooner rather than later. I need a safer alternative, fast." Damien's grin vanished as he stepped closer. "All right, let's figure this out." He glanced back at the bench, already forming a plan. "I'll run a new set of simulations tonight. We'll test every viable element everybody's overlooked." Tony managed a weary smile. "You're a lifesaver." He tapped the reactor's housing. "Literally." Damien's eyes shone with determination. "Let's get to work." In addition to finding new power cores, there's a way to fully restore your body and even extend your life expectancy. Damien's heart skipped a beat at those words. "If you mean removing the shrapnel from my chest and forbidding me to ever wear the suit again," he said, voice low, "you can stop talking right now." Tony Stark inclined his head. "When you first realized there was a genuine external threat, you'd have been no better off than a sitting duck without your armor." "I get that, but hear me out." Damien crossed his arms, brow furrowed. "I don't trust myself to be just another rich guy if the suit's gone. When you feel that power, walking into danger knowing you've got something bulletproof around you, you don't easily give it up." Stark waved a dismissive hand. "If you'd already sworn yourself to life as a powered pilot, you wouldn't have waited for explanations. You'd have booked the surgery yesterday to remove your shrapnel. But you've flown in that armor. You've felt what it's like to make a real difference. And believe me, there's a lot more danger out there than you realize. You're not going back to normal, Damien. You're pushing forward, richer or not, suit or no suit." Damien glanced away, his jaw working. Tony's words settled in his mind. Money might buy doctors and tech, but when the real fight came, only one thing mattered: how far he was willing to go in that armor. Damien Ambalaka stepped into Tony Stark's workshop, where arc reactors hummed beneath workbenches and holographic schematics floated in midair. He regarded Stark evenly before speaking. "Let me be clear," Damien said, arms loosely folded. "I'm not about to recommend something as crude as surgery, then have you give up your steel armor altogether." Tony leaned back in his chair, curiosity piqued. "So it's not surgery. What exactly are you proposing?" Damien gave a faint smile. "Since you don't seem keen to hear it, you might as well pretend I never brought it up." Stark's brow lifted. "All right, then enlighten me another time." He waved a hand toward the center of the room. "Why don't we talk about your favorite piece of steel armor instead?" Without answering, Damien crossed the workshop and paused before a gleaming suit of armor on its display stand. He ran a fingertip over the polished plating, peering closely at the intricate joints. "You invited me here to show off your latest tech," Damien observed, voice soft but direct. "I'm simply admiring it." Stark watched him, a flicker of regret passing his eyes. Damien was an enigma, someone who claimed to have a method that outstripped surgery or conventional armor. If only he'd share it. Clearing his throat, Tony decided to shift gears. "Fair enough. Let's put the armor discussion on hold." He stole another glance at Damien, who was still studying the suit as if it held the answers to all their questions. Tony knew he was on the brink of something extraordinary, if only Damien would let him in. "Let's pick up where we left off," Tony Stark said, though inside he hated straying from the real issue, the deteriorating palladium core slowly poisoning him. Damien, until now called Harvey in the translation, studied Tony for a moment, then feigned curiosity. "Does this have anything to do with curing my condition?" Tony grimaced and held out his hand. "Trust me, I'll help you this time. Reach out." Damien placed his left hand over Tony's. "According to my estimates, you'll slip into unconsciousness for a minute or two, but you'll come around." Before Tony could protest, darkness swallowed his vision. He went limp in Damien's grip. A soft pulse of life energy flowed from Damien's palm into Tony's body, steadying his weak heartbeat. With his right hand free, Damien drew his index finger across Tony's chest in a precise, deliberate motion. The blade of his fingertip parted the skin, exposing the living, beating heart beneath. Most people would recoil at the sight of exposed organs. But Damien's focus never wavered. His energy flared around the incision, sealing blood vessels even as he prepared to draw out the corrupted palladium source deep in Tony's core and save a life he could no longer afford to lose. Damien's expression never flickered, even as he took in the grisly sight before him. He shut out the chaos and focused inward, reading the intricate weave of Tony Stark's veins as clearly as if they were laid bare. Power from the void gathered in Damien's right hand, a soft purple glow coalescing into thread-like filaments. With surgical precision, those silken strands slipped beneath Tony's skin, tracing the path to every remaining shard of metal. Then, as gently as a spider might extract a splintered twig, they drew out the last pieces of shrapnel. No sooner had the fragments been removed than Damien channeled his life energy into Tony's wounded body. Surface abrasions scabbed and faded in an instant. Deeper lacerations closed with a faint pop, visible even in the dim light. Within 10 seconds, the tear in Tony's chest had sealed completely. Damien laid him on the floor and placed the glinting shrapnel on a nearby table, proof that the job was done. Less than 2 minutes later, Tony stirred. His vision had dimmed, as if he'd slipped into darkness, but when his eyes reopened, he saw the ceiling above him. He pushed himself up without struggle, his movements smooth and unlabored, and tested his sight. Everything looked sharper than before. Damien watched quietly as Tony flexed his shoulders. The tense line of worry on his face gave way to astonishment. Whatever damage Tony had suffered just moments ago was already a fading memory, thanks to Damien's uncanny healing gift. Tony met Damien's calm gaze, and for the first time, a genuine smile tugged at his lips. Damien's hands hovered just above Tony's chest, a soft, pulsing warmth radiating from his palms. In an instant, the dull ache that Tony Stark had carried for years vanished, his mind clearing as if a fog had finally lifted. At 38, Tony wasn't exactly frail. He'd long since shrugged off any major injuries, but he'd grown used to the occasional twinge, a reminder that age and endless battles took their toll. Now every sore spot, every nagging discomfort dissolved into nothingness. Tony sat up, eyes wide. What did you do? How is this even possible? Damien met his gaze calmly. No tricks. I removed the shrapnel embedded in your chest and purged the palladium poisoning from your bloodstream. Tony pressed a hand against his ribcage, flexing experimentally. The metal fragments are really gone? And the palladium's gone with them? Completely, Damien replied. This should give you enough time to find a more permanent energy source, something to replace the element in your arc reactor. Tony leaned back, exhaling in amazement. I have to admit, that's beyond anything I expected. Thank you. Damien merely smiled and shook his head. He didn't offer a detailed explanation. His power to absorb life energy and direct it toward healing, whether for himself or others, was best left unspoken. For now, it was enough that Tony Stark felt whole again. Damien knew that convincing Tony Stark to embrace the void would require more than mere words. He'd have to let Stark feel its power, feel his body healed, rejuvenated, strengthened beyond its natural limits. After all, no one could refuse the promise of a longer life, renewed youth, or added vigor. As Damien watched from the shadows of the lab, he ran through the plan in his head. Once Tony experienced the void's restorative touch, he would be driven to recover his father's old research notes and use them to synthesize a truly new element. That element would banish his palladium dependency for good, and the memory of this newfound vitality would compel him, of his own accord, to seek Damien out and demand more. Only then would Tony fully commit to the void's cause. Moments later, Tony Stark burst into the room. Without a word, he strode to the nearby workbench, lifted a small metal box, and flipped open its lid. Inside lay his improvised palladium detector. He clipped it to his arm, tapped a few controls, and watched the display flicker. Then the readout blinked steady green, 0 traces of palladium in his bloodstream. He stared at the screen, disbelief flickering in his eyes. Damien stepped forward, calm and expectant, as Stark tore the device from his arm and repeated the scan. Again, the meter confirmed it. Every last particle of palladium was gone. For a heartbeat, the lab fell silent. And in that charged stillness, Damien saw Tony's resolve harden. He knew that, before long, Tony would approach him with one question: how to make this miracle permanent. And when Tony asked, he would willingly join the void and never look back. A sharp metallic tang in the air alerted Tony Stark. He followed the scent to a table 10 meters away, where a small, darkened shard of shrapnel lay smeared with dried blood. Tony closed his eyes for a moment, concentrating inward. His chest felt perfectly intact. No sting, no bruise, nothing amiss. Jarvis! Tony spoke the word clearly, and the nearest display flickered to life. The screen shifted into a mirror image of him, head to waist. He peeled back his suit jacket and shirt. There was a smear of blood across his chest, but no puncture, no cut. Jarvis, how long was I out? In total, approximately 72 seconds, came the calm reply. Tony glanced back across the room at Damien Ambaraka, who stood a few feet from the table, expression unreadable. Damien Ambaraka, this is one of your abilities, isn't it? Damien's dark eyes met Tony's. He inclined his head ever so slightly. It's a small trick, he admitted quietly. Given your systems, you're the one best equipped to confirm it. Tony Stark's eyes lit up at Damien's words. Wait, if we're ever in a fight and someone on our side gets hurt and you can heal them, doesn't that basically make them invincible? Striding over to Damien, Tony barely contained his excitement. You don't know how thrilled I am right now. Damien offered a gentle reminder. Just don't forget what I told you. Tony's fervor stalled for a moment at the prompt, allowing him to take a steadying breath. Damien Ambalaka, he said, gripping Damien's hand and meeting his gaze. His tone grew earnest. I owe you more than I can say. Up until now, Tony had only intended to fish for intel and show off a little. But after everything he'd learned tonight, and the fact that Damien had literally healed him, he realized how much he truly owed his new friend. I've even been buying Stark Industries stock lately, Tony admitted with a half grin. So if you, as chairman, ever end up dead, Eid and the stock tanks, well, let's just say I'd lose my shirt. Damien let out a short laugh. Consider your portfolio protected. Just doing a friend a favor here. No repayment necessary. Damien settled back in his chair, letting the tension of the earlier conversation melt away. He knew better than to ask Tony Stark outright for repayment. Favors were always harder to square than cold, hard cash. Still, he couldn't shake the unease clouding his thoughts. "But," Tony began, brows knitting together, "we should talk this through." "Enough." Damien held up a hand. "Do me one favor. Don't use my name, ever." Tony opened his mouth, but before he could respond, Damien leaned forward with a crooked smile. "Besides, I didn't come here to haggle over who owes whom. You said you had dinner ready. It's been hours. Where is it?" Tony glanced toward the silent panels lining the walls. "Jarvis?" A moment later, the AI's calm voice crackled through the speakers. "Dinner is served on the second floor, sir. I didn't interrupt. You two were so animated." "Animated, huh?" Damien pushed himself to his feet. "Well, I'm starving." Tony smirked and stood too. "After you." They climbed the staircase together, Damien's earlier concerns shelved for the promise of a hot meal. Chapter 25. Destroying Records. "You really shouldn't head back so soon," Tony said over his shoulder as they strolled down the lobby. Damien grinned. "I haven't shown you my armor yet." Tony stopped in his tracks. "Good point. In fact," he tapped his phone, eyes brightening, "I just extended your reservation, but there is one condition. I need you to organize another dinner, a full banquet for 100 people." Damien paused. 100? Just like that?" Tony shrugged, a playful gleam in his eyes. "New York nights aren't exactly peaceful these days, but you'll be safe here. Besides, I've got to prepare for life in the void. My appetite won't shrink, so why not plan big now? Midnight snacks, elaborate feasts, it's all part of the package." Damien studied him for a moment. Tony Stark was never one to eat small, and if he was already thinking ahead, this banquet was only the beginning. He nodded once. "Consider it done." "Excellent," Tony said, looping an arm through Damien's. "In the meantime, let's grab dinner. I'm starving." Damien smiled quietly. Whatever changes Tony's future might bring, he'd make sure they were ready. "Hey, what were you two chatting about?" Pepper asked, glancing up as Tony and Damien strolled toward the dining table. Tony gave a casual shrug. "We were talking about the future of Blue Star, my latest scientific breakthroughs too." Pepper shot him a knowing look. "Oh, here we go again." Tony held up his hands defensively. "I swear, it really was about Blue Star's prospects this time." He paused, then added with mock solemnity, "I know, it sounds like our standard topics. Glamorous women, fine wines, sports cars, cutting-edge tech, and the future." Pepper let out an exasperated sigh. "Correction, it's never just idle chatter." Tony leaned closer, earnest now. "Exactly. With our positions, it isn't small talk. We can make a real impact, shape the future, not just gossip about it." Meanwhile, Damien had already slipped into his seat and begun to eat. They watched in silent amusement as he lifted forkful after forkful to his mouth with polished, almost delicate motions, yet devoured his meal at lightning speed. Tony and Pepper exchanged a grin, then turned their attention back to the young man, whose appetite for both conversation and cuisine seemed boundless. "I've heard the rumors," Pepper said, her voice trembling with disbelief as she surveyed the ever-growing pile of empty plates, "but seeing it in person, I still can't quite believe it." Across the table, Damien never paused for more than a second. His fork flew in and out of his plate so quickly that Tony had to double-check his eyes. Feeling the room's collective astonishment, Tony Stark dramatically pressed a hand to his chest. "I know, right? And somehow, I feel like I've aged backward just watching him." Pepper arched an eyebrow. "Or maybe you're just in a great mood." Tony waved her off with a grin. "Partly, but mostly it's thanks to Damien here. He took care of the shrapnel in my chest, and not only that, he purified the palladium poisoning from my system. Sure, I still need the arc reactor to power my suit, so I'll reaccumulate some toxin over time. But with Damien around, I don't have to lose sleep over it." Damien paused mid-bite and met Tony's eye. "Actually, look at yourself. You've lost those fine lines around your eyes and mouth." Pepper reached into her purse and produced a small mirror, passing it to Tony. "Go on, take a look." Tony turned the mirror over in his hand and stared at his reflection. The familiar crinkles at the corners of his eyes were gone, and his skin looked smoother than it had in years. He let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. I really do look younger." Pepper laughed, leaning back in her chair as Damien resumed eating with unabated vigor. In that moment, anything seemed possible. Tony Stark studied his reflection in the mirror. He looked years younger, more like someone who had just turned 30 than a 38-year-old man. His hair showed no hint of gray, his skin was smooth, and the fine lines around his eyes had vanished. Pepper Potts watched him, her expression serious. "Have you developed some new technology?" she asked. Tony shook his head. "I'm no geneticist or pharmacologist. There's no miracle serum hiding in my workshop." She crossed her arms, unconvinced. "Then how have your wrinkles disappeared?" Pepper leaned closer, determined to learn the secret behind Tony's sudden and seemingly impossible rejuvenation. "I don't know either." Tony shook his head, just as puzzled as Pepper. He cast a quick glance at Damien Ambalaka, who was busy upending plates and ripping apart the buffet line. Whatever was happening to Tony had to be linked to Damien's sudden changes. "I need to head down to the lab," Tony said. "Pepper, stay up here. I'll fill you in as soon as I know more." Pepper folded her arms. "You're not going to tell me everything, are you?" Tony offered her a roguish grin. "Sorry, no prying allowed, at least not yet." She sighed in frustration as Tony turned toward the staircase leading to the underground research facility. At the top of the stairs, he paused to check on Damien. Finding him still engrossed in demolishing every hors d'oeuvre in sight, Tony allowed himself a moment of relief. Pepper watched him go, cheeks flushed, determined not to follow him this time. Moments later, Tony stepped into the familiar hum of his lab. "Jarvis," he called, "initiate a full-body scan and compare it to my last baseline." A soft red glow swept across his skin as the AI began its analysis. "Scanners indicate a marked increase in your cellular activity. Your body is significantly stronger," Jarvis announced. "No diseases detected. Your biological age has decreased by 6 years. You are now on a cellular level as you were at 32. Jarvis then projected 2 holographic displays illustrating the transformation. Tony Stark stared in astonishment. "Rejuvenation?" he murmured. He shifted his gaze to the hologram of himself. The figure was leaner, straighter, practically younger. "Damien Ambalaka, what on earth did you do to me?" Tony ran a hand across his chest, remembering how Damien had removed the shrapnel and extracted the palladium from his bloodstream. But this was beyond any life-saving surgery. It was cellular enhancement. It was age reversal. Humans had long pursued gene therapy and anti-aging treatments, yet breakthroughs remained limited, and many diseases were still incurable. Yet here, in Damien's workshop, Tony had been cleansed of every toxin, his cells revitalized, his years peeled away. It was nothing short of a miracle, and a portent of things to come. Tony Stark could scarcely fathom what kind of power he was witnessing. If Damien Ambalaka chose to share this rejuvenation technique, even for a fortune beyond imagining, countless wealthy clients would line up to have their youth restored. The potential influence of this discovery far exceeded anything Tony had anticipated. "Sir," Jarvis's calm voice interrupted his thoughts. "Explaining it verbally may not do it justice. You should see it with your own eyes." On command, a holographic projection shimmered to life before Tony. The recording spanned less than a minute. He watched himself reach out in greeting to Damien, and then everything changed in an instant. Damien's fingers, initially indistinguishable from any ordinary hand, straightened and sharpened until they gleamed like surgical scalpels. With terrifying precision, they sliced through Tony's chest. From the wound, dozens of slender, violet filaments slithered forth, burrowing directly toward his heart. In a matter of seconds, those glowing threads had located every fragment of embedded shrapnel and extracted it without so much as a tremor in Tony's flesh. As the last shard was pulled free, the filaments withdrew, leaving pristine muscle and skin in their wake. No scars, no sign of injury. The projection ended, and Tony staggered back from the display, his mind racing to comprehend the implications of what he had just seen. In under 10 seconds, the deep gashes along Damien Ambalaka's arm sealed themselves so quickly that the healing was plainly visible. When the bizarre demonstration was over, Damien stepped back, hesitated for a moment, then lay himself flat on the floor. The recording continued only until he fell unconscious, breathing steadily, and then it cut out. Tony Stark sat motionless, the holographic feed gone dark. He rubbed his chin, incredulous. "Is that just a parlor trick?" he murmured to himself. He knew better. Damien had shown not only an astonishing regenerative power, but also hands as sharp as blades, abilities so extraordinary that Tony could only begin to imagine what else Damien might be capable of. Despite being a self-proclaimed genius, Tony realized there were realms of superhuman talent that he still didn't fully understand. The implications of Damien's gifts were unsettling and, frankly, a little terrifying. With a steadying breath, he turned to Jarvis. "Delete every trace of this session," he ordered. "Erase the footage and all records of my discussion with Damien Umbaraka tonight." "Sir," Jarvis replied in its composed tone, "that data is exceptionally valuable. Are you certain you wish to destroy it?" Tony's private lab was eerily silent once the playback ended. The only sound came from the soft hum of the arc reactor and Jarvis's unobtrusive voice. "Sir," Jarvis prompted, "shall I store tonight's footage on a secure, private server instead of deleting it outright?" Tony Stark leaned back, his face drawn. "No," he said firmly. "Destroy every last bit. Don't keep any records." "Understood," Jarvis replied. Even an AI could appreciate how sensitive, how explosive those images were. "If word gets out about what happened tonight," Tony continued, "it could unleash chaos. Worse, it could ruin Damien Umbaraka. He'd be painted as a murderer. We can't risk anyone hacking in and seeing that footage." Jarvis's interface flickered. "Initiating data purge now." Seconds later, a progress bar filled and disappeared. "First of 3 update protocols complete," Jarvis confirmed. Tony exhaled, rubbing his temples. The lab fell quiet again, every bite of evidence wiped clean, at least for now. Chapter 26. The Nature of Humanity. Tony Stark watched the progress bar climb steadily until it finally hit 100%. He pressed his hands flat against the workbench and let out a long, shaky breath, relief flooding every nerve. He hadn't even realized when a cold sweat had broken out across his back, but now he understood why. Whenever we witness something, both beautiful and inscrutable, an ability brimming with limitless potential, it sparks a heady mix of curiosity and excitement. That rush had hit Tony the moment Damien restored his body, cell by cell. Feeling his wounds knit themselves together, he dared to believe in invincibility. As long as Damien was by their side, he imagined, they'd never have to fear pain, so long as they never died. But true encounters with the unknown carry a darker undercurrent, raw, primal fear. Watching Damien heal himself in real time had sent a chill through Tony's core, snuffing out his exhilaration. If word ever got out that Damien possessed this power, if governments, militaries, or worse, villains learned how marvelously unstoppable he could be, the consequences would be catastrophic. Tony dropped his forehead into his hands, the weight of that realization pressing down on him. The nature of humanity, he thought, is to fear whatever it cannot comprehend. And right now, the world would tremble before Damien's gift. Countless people would kill to get their hands on Damien Umbaraka, some to unlock cures for diseases that modern medicine can't touch, others to chase the dream of eternal youth. But the footage we just reviewed showed so much more. Damien didn't merely heal at an impossible speed. A pulsing purple energy snaked from his body like a living arm, and his fingertips gleamed with blade-sharp precision. Clearly he can defend himself. No one would dare examine him so closely if he couldn't. "Have you deleted the recording?" I asked over my shoulder. A quiet voice answered from the dim hallway. Damien stepped into the lab, calm and composed. "I saw it. I couldn't leave it intact." I turned to face him, watching him enter the underground facility. Offering a half smile, I said, "I know I make you uneasy, but if I wanted you silenced, you wouldn't still be standing here." He met my gaze without flinching. "Then why are you helping me?" he asked, his tone measured. I paused, choosing my words with care. "Because you're worth far more alive than you'd ever be as a trophy." Damien rubbed his temples as his phone buzzed for what felt like the 100th time. When he finally answered, he found himself staring at Tony Stark's familiar smirk. "Tony Stark," Damien began, exasperated. "Aren't you overthinking this?" Tony's grin widened. "Overthinking? You do realize you've been fielding my calls every single day for the past month, right?" Damien went silent. He'd approached Stark with an ulterior motive, impressing him, then recruiting him into the void, but he never expected Tony to become so relentless. Finally, to stop the incessant ringing, Damien tapped the screen and spoke. "Fine, what do you want?" Tony chuckled. "Honestly, I'm just following my mood, but enough small talk, let's discuss your tech." Damien saw Tony was primed for debate, but without a solid comeback, Stark fell quiet. Damien seized the opening. All right, my latest developments are the Mark IV and Mark V armors. He paused for effect. The Mark IV is pure combat, reinforced plating, maximum repulsor output, onboard tactical AI, no compromises for frontline engagement. The Mark V, by contrast, prioritizes mobility, lightweight alloys, a modular design that lets you suit up in under 60 seconds anywhere. Leaning back, Damien steepled his fingers. Both represent the culmination of my best innovations. For the first time in weeks, Damien felt he'd steered the conversation. Now he only had to keep Stark interested, long enough to convince him to join the void. They can cruise at high altitudes and hit top speeds of Mach 2, Damien explained, gesturing toward the two gleaming Sioux, bits of armor standing before them. The hull's made from the same composite materials used on aerospace satellites, tough, temperature-resistant, and impervious to small arms fire. We even integrated palm-mounted blasters. Tony Stark's eyes lit up. He strode around the nearest armor, running a hand over its surface. In just over a month, you've gotten these suits from prototype to something that rivals my own designs, he said with an appreciative nod. Impressive work. I can only imagine how much further you'll push them. He paused, folding his arms across his chest. But, he added, no matter how advanced your armor becomes, there's one limitation you can't upgrade away. Damien crossed his arms and leaned back, waiting. Tony fixed him with a steady gaze. You, Tony continued, if you bring any unresolved weakness into combat, anything that can't be swapped out or reprogrammed, you're putting your life on the line. Damien tapped the armor's forearm with his knuckles. The metal rang with a solid ping. I know that, he said quietly. I've thought about every vulnerability I could, but I can't eliminate the biggest one. He paused, meeting Tony's gaze. Because at the end of the day, I'm still human. I'll grow old, I could get injured, and eventually, I'll die. Tony Stark nodded, his expression serious. Exactly. No matter how smart you are, no matter how cutting-edge your tech, you're not invincible. Keep that in mind every time you strap into one of these suits. Piloting a suit of powered armor isn't fundamentally different from flying a combat jet. Both depend on cutting-edge technology, and the moment your armor or airframe is breached, you're as exposed as any frontline soldier. Damien knew that death could come without warning. That's why his first instinct was to team up with Colonel Rhodes. His own tactical brilliance, paired with Rhodes's hard-won combat experience, could unleash the armor's full power. Rhodes, however, refused outright. He dismissed the proposal in a single brusque gesture, forcing Damien to take the cockpit himself. Damien's earlier remarks had been a calculated jab at Tony Stark's pride, a reminder that for all his genius, Tony's position wasn't unassailable. Just now? So you actually have a method? Tony asked, leaning forward, his eyes sharp. Damien met his gaze steadily. I do. Let me explain. Damien leaned over the holographic schematics hovering above the lab bench, his brow furrowed. I need to strengthen my own body, he began, eyes fixed on the glowing contours of his armor design. Its greatest weakness is its reliance on external systems. If I could enhance my genetics, I could eliminate that vulnerability. Tony Stark looked up from his keyboard, fingers tapping thoughtfully against one another. Genetic treatments that are both side-effect-free and fully compatible with the human body? That's the holy grail, he said. But to develop something like that, you'd have to conduct human trials, and the ethical hurdles are enormous. Damien nodded. Exactly. That's why I've never set foot in the genetics field. Tony leaned back in his chair, steepling his hands. After a moment he asked, What do you think makes someone human? Damien's gaze snapped to him. The question struck a chord he hadn't expected. He thought of the powered individuals who suppress their abilities just to appear ordinary, desperate to be seen as one of us rather than one of them. Yet even among so-called normal people, disparities ran deep: wealth, influence, social standing. Those with any advantage used it to amass more. Human nature, he reflected, is driven by self-interest and greed. Give people a chance, and they'll reach for every scrap of power they can grab. And if they don't seize the opportunity, they're swiftly left behind. Tony watched him and, for the first time that evening, offered a small smile. Damien realized there was no simple answer. Being human was a tangle of virtues and flaws, courageous deeds and selfish impulses. But acknowledging that complexity, he knew, was the first step toward greater strength. both for himself and for the armor he'd built. Nick Fury's words had cut through Damien's complacency. You're lying to yourself, holding back to protect the weak, pretending to be ordinary. For almost 3 years, he had wielded the power of the void without a second thought, but Fury's reminder forced him to face the truth. As he reflected, Damien at last recognized the source of his strength and accepted himself. Later, Tony Stark leaned forward, curiosity in his eyes. When you say the thing you desire, are you talking about a man or a woman? Damien shook his head. Not gender. I mean what humans want at their very core. He turned, meeting Tony's gaze with a half-smile. You can't pin down humanity with a single label. Every person has different desires and needs. Tony tapped his chin, considering. Sure, people can be arrogant, insecure, kind, or selfish, but those are just traits, not the essence of humanity. Damien's smile deepened. No, the essence of every human being is the will to survive. In order to survive, humans instinctively crave power, and they lean on it to get everything they desire. Profound knowledge, overwhelming force, lofty rank, or a singular talent. Anything that sets someone apart becomes their strength. Across the ages and around the globe, men have more often held the reins of power, though there have always been exceptional women who reached the very top. That fact proves women's hunger for power matches men's. It's just that history has made it far harder for them to seize it, so their triumphs feel rarer. And whenever anyone possesses even a slight advantage, be it status, wealth, or ability, others instinctively mark that difference. We refuse to associate with those we regard as far beneath us, and feel ashamed if we're seen in their company. History is full of such examples, and neither you nor I are immune. So tell me, Damien said slowly, his gaze fixed on the gleaming steel armor before him, do you still believe that human nature should be defined by dividing us into men and women? Tony Stark opened his mouth to argue, but found himself hesitating. Damien's point was too clear to dismiss outright. You're calling me unreasonable? Tony finally blurted, more defensively than he intended. Damien leaned back, watching him coolly. Not at all. I'm merely reminding you of human nature. At our core, we all want to survive. Once that need is met, we begin craving more, better living conditions, higher status, greater power. Tony frowned, rubbing his chin. So you're saying it's wrong to want power? Damien shook his head. Not wrong, natural, but powerful people also carry heavy burdens. Before you seek more power, ask yourself, are you truly ready for the responsibility? If you aren't mentally prepared, there's no shame in holding back. His words settled over the room like a whisper of temptation, quietly unsettling some of Tony's deepest certainties. They wouldn't change his mind today, but the next time he reached for more power, when he confronted his own vulnerabilities, that seed of doubt might well tip the balance. Damien straightened up from his workbench and gave Tony a wry smile. I already took care of your dinner. No midnight snack for me tonight. He tapped a vial of pale green solution. I cleared the palladium out of your system. Don't think I'm doing you that favor again. I'm helping you once, not starting a habit. Leaning forward, Damien locked eyes with Tony. Use this extra time wisely. Search for alternative elements to replace palladium. That's the only way to fix this problem for good. He stayed silent for a moment, letting his words sink in. Tony Stark remained still beside the experimental rig, his mind racing through possibilities. With a curt nod, Damien turned and strode toward the exit, leaving Tony alone in the underground lab. Sparks of determination flashed in Stark's eyes as his brain lit up with fresh ideas. Chapter 27, Tony's Whereabouts. Pepper looked up just as Damien Ambalaka emerged from the stairwell that led down to the research labs. Mr. Ambalaka, do you know where Tony is? Damien paused on the bottom step. He should surface on his own in a little while. Of course, you could always go down and find him yourself. Pepper glanced at her watch. I've already finished dinner, so I'll be heading out. Damien offered her a friendly smile. You're leaving so soon? She cast a quick look at the wall clock. Just after 9. Yep, it's late, and New York doesn't stay this peaceful for long. He nodded thoughtfully. I noticed you two had a good conversation. I hope I'll get to join you again sometime. Pepper raised an eyebrow in mild surprise. I'm sure that can be arranged. Good night, Miss Pepper. With that, Damien gave a polite nod and walked toward the exit. Pepper descended to the first-floor lobby, determined to track Tony down before she left. Pepper hovered anxiously by the elevator bank. "Jarvis, is Tony all right?" "He's fine, ma'am," the AI replied. "He's deep in thought right now." "May I go down and check on him?" "I wouldn't recommend it," Jarvis advised. "He prefers to be alone until he's had time to process everything. Once he's ready, he'll come up on his own." Pepper exhaled. Although worry still pricked at her, Jarvis's counsel persuaded her to wait. She leaned back against the wall, arms folded, and tried to calm her racing mind. Below, in the Stark Industries subterranean lab, Tony Stark paced near his workbench. The crash of gears and the soft hum of arc reactors filled the cavernous room, but his attention was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the conversation he'd had with Damien Ambalaca. Damien's reckless suggestion that Tony explore genetic enhancement and develop a serum to make his body stronger had caught him off guard. Tony had considered many extreme measures before, some quite dark, but he'd always rejected them outright. Yet Damien's words, delivered so calmly and confidently, had planted a seed of doubt in his mind. Was it so outlandish to dive into genetic research? The challenge fascinated him. He paused in front of the holo display. Strands of DNA spun lazily in midair, intercut with structural diagrams of proteins and enzyme pathways. "Jarvis," Tony said, voice low, "I want your take on this. After listening to my conversation with Damien Ambalaca, what do you think of pursuing a genetic serums project?" There was a brief pause before Jarvis replied, "Sir, the ethical and technical hurdles would be immense. However, if you're determined, I can begin running preliminary simulations on gene editing vectors. I would recommend exhaustive safety protocols before any in vivo trials." Stark tapped his chin, weighing the AI's cautious but supportive response. He straightened, resolve hardening in his eyes. "All right, let's see what the numbers say." "Sir, I still can't fully comprehend what it means to be human. After all, I'm just an AI," Damien admitted, his synthetic voice soft in the dimly lit control chamber. The armored figure across from him shifted slightly, the servos in his exosuit humming. "Yet I explained it to you. Summarize my 3 main points." Damien paused for a moment, processing. Then, in a clear, measured tone, he began. "First, your steel armor is extraordinarily powerful, capable of withstanding almost any assault. But it carries one inescapable weakness, you, sir. No matter how strong the plating, it cannot shield a man from his own mortality. Second, you have both the means and the intellect to eliminate that weakness. You could pursue genetic enhancements that render a body virtually invulnerable. But bound by your ethical code, you've never crossed that line. Third, it's precisely this refusal to sacrifice your principles that defines you. You acknowledge your limits, and in doing so, you preserve your humanity." The figure in armor fell silent, considering Damien's words. Beyond the polished steel and the calculated logic of AI, there lay something both fragile and resilient, the man himself. Damien Ambalaca studied the armor's schematics flickering across the holo display, his expression calm but insistent. "Sir," he said, "before you authorize any modifications, have you asked yourself whether they're truly necessary, and are you prepared for the consequences?" He tapped a data column that highlighted the reactor's core. "From what I can see, you haven't fully examined your underlying assumptions. My recommendation is to focus first on finding a palladium substitute. Unless we can guarantee the new material won't disrupt the suit's power flow or introduce dangerous side effects, there's no point in trying to eliminate the steel frame's critical weakness." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You probably won't have all the answers immediately, but sooner or later, you'll need to make a decision." At that moment, Jarvis processed Tony's follow-up question. "Thank you, Jarvis," Tony replied, more to himself than to the AI. For a heartbeat, he seemed unsteady. Then, as if a fog lifted from his mind, clarity returned. He gave Jarvis a brief nod of gratitude. Damien Ambalaca wasn't just a genius. His superhuman abilities sharpened an already brilliant mind. Yet because his perspective was so singular, the solutions he proposed often diverged sharply from everyone else's. Tonight was no different. Damien threw himself into mastering the steel armor. It was the only way he could truly connect with this new reality, one that felt so foreign compared to the ordinary world he'd known. The deeper his understanding grew, the more freely he and Harvey Ambalaca could share ideas. Damien sensed that Ambalaka believed his own armor research was on the brink of something great, and that's why the elder genius had devoted so much time to them both, each conversation expanding their horizons. Still, one nagging thought kept surfacing in Tony Stark's mind. How old was Harvey Ambalaka, really? Rumors of Ambalaka's ability to rejuvenate himself meant that any official records might be nothing more than a carefully maintained facade. Glancing around the workshop, Tony realized Ambalaka was nowhere to be found. "Where's Harvey Ambalaka?" he called out, worry threading his voice. "Dr. Damien Ambalak has just left. Before he went, he made one thing perfectly clear. He won't always be there to treat your palladium poisoning. You need to find a substitute for palladium or give up piloting the armor altogether. The next time you're contaminated and can't get help, you'll die." Jarvis relayed the warning precisely. "Sir, until I discovered that my physiology was actually reversing, I'd been planning to rely on Dr. Ambalak for any palladium-related complications. But once the anti-aging treatment kicked in, palladium toxicity no longer seemed like a showstopper." Tony Stark leaned back in his chair and let a slow smile spread across his face. There's a world of difference between simply curing an injury and curing it while turning back the clock. Thanks to Ambalak's work, he dropped 6 years off his biological age. His body now matched the 32-year-old version of himself. Technically, he was still in his 30s, still middle-aged, but for the first time in years, he felt like he'd reclaimed a piece of his youth. Damien's face was smooth and unlined. He looked years younger. To anybody passing by, it would seem he'd merely taken up a more vigorous skincare routine or opted for some unexpected cosmetic work. But if he ever appeared in his 20s, fresh-faced and free of age's marks, nobody would swallow an easy explanation. They'd begin whispering that something supernatural or sinister was at play. More alarmingly, it might blow his cover as a metahuman altogether and attract the military's interest in abducting him for experimentation. Even his advanced suit of armor couldn't guarantee his safety if he became a high-value target. Tony Stark understood Damien's caution perfectly. Secrets like these weren't meant for casual coffee table chatter. After Tony left the underground research wing, Pepper confronted him in the main corridor, peppering him with questions. "What did you do down there?" she pressed. "Why does everyone say Damien looks different?" Tony smiled, half amused, half apologetic. "I wish I could tell you," he answered lightly, "but I really don't know what's going on." Pepper's brow furrowed. She knew Tony well enough to sense when he was holding back, and her disappointment was immediate. After all, there isn't a woman alive who wouldn't be curious about a secret that can shave years off your appearance. Yet Tony's tone was honest, his shrug genuine. She let the subject drop, but as they stepped into the elevator together, her mind was already racing through theories, and her eagerness to uncover the truth only grew. "I'd be happy to help, but it looks like I only have one sentence of the chapter here. Could you please paste the full text, all 8,000 words of the third update, so I can rewrite it into smooth, idiomatic English and be sure Damien is consistently portrayed as male. Once I have the complete passage, I'll deliver a polished version ready for an English-speaking audience." Chapter 28, New Year's Invitation. Damien pulled into the driveway of his ancestral manor just as the sky was darkening. He'd spent the afternoon mapping out his next moves, and now the only thing left to do was kick back and wait for Tony Stark's inevitable visit. He slid out of the car, called in an order for a dozen different takeout dishes, and let himself into the quiet house. Only someone like Stark, brilliant, well-connected, and bound by fate, could tip the balance in Damien's favor. In a perfect world, he'd prefer to recruit Bruce Banner. Banner's ability to channel the Hulk's void energy would be a tremendous asset. The problem was that Banner was hiding, terrified of the monster within him. He didn't understand that true power isn't about fearfully suppressing your potential, but mastering it. Damien was determined to make Banner see how misplaced his anxieties were. Just not tonight. For now, the abomination made a more realistic quarry. Emil Blonsky's raw strength didn't rival the Hulk's, but it was still formidable, and he was under government lock and key. Unfortunately, Damien had no idea which secure facility was housing him. He could try asking General Ross directly, but drawing that much official scrutiny would be a mistake. Damien needed a subtler approach. He glanced around the great hall, already setting up his laptop on the oak sideboard. By the time the delivery drivers arrived with fragrant boxes of food, he would have a plan to locate Blonsky without ringing any alarm bells. And once he'd made contact with the abomination, the rest would fall into place. A soft chime from his phone signaled incoming messages. Damien let the aroma of spicy noodles and lemon pepper chicken fill the room as he tapped through his contacts. Tonight, the real invitation would be delivered, and in the new year, the game would begin in earnest. Damien had 9 years to go before the purple sweet potato spirit arrived, and plenty of time to rack up over 1,000 evolutions. If he could secure more hero templates, he'd be able to challenge even Thanos in his hard steel armor. The next big milestone was the Void Walker Cassidon template. Once he had that, he wouldn't be confined to Blue Star. He would roam the galaxies, found the Void Cult, and hunt the universe's monsters. By draining their life energy, he'd earn countless evolution points, and could easily surpass 1,000 total evolutions. If he also managed to claim the Death Star's Void Reaver origin and fuse it with his other templates, Damien was certain he could, and would, stand his ground against any cosmic power. Even if the Celestials remained beyond his reach, he'd no longer have to fear their threat of annihilation. It was currently 2008, with just 2 months left before 2009. The great explosion of superhero activity still lay 3 years in the future, after the Battle of New York in 2012. And Damien intended to make every moment count. His evolutionary efficiency and the rate at which he absorbed void energy never slowed as he continued to evolve. If anything, each new transformation only made him stronger and faster than before. With that exhilarating thought in mind, Damien leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile on his face as he resumed the game. After Damien healed Tony and spent some time guiding him, Tony Stark abandoned his old habit of indiscriminate combat. He formally turned over day-to-day management of Stark Industries to Pepper, only personally signing off on the most critical decisions, and devoted the rest of his energy to research. His conversations with Damien had opened his eyes to possibilities beyond his previous understanding, and a rejuvenating procedure removed the shrapnel that had long threatened his life. No longer reliant on the arc reactor in his chest, Tony's body felt younger and more vital than it had in years. That newfound vigor accelerated his development schedule dramatically. Rather than progressing slowly through Mark IV and Mark V, Tony's suit designs vaulted all the way to Mark XII in just 2 months. E-performance gains were nothing short of revolutionary, and the world was about to see just how far the boundary between man and machine could be pushed. For the new steel armor trials, Tony Stark only needed to don the housing during testing, which dramatically slowed the palladium poisoning in his bloodstream. Freed from the constant grind of invention, however, he slid into a decadent stupor, weeks of feasting and late-night parties that left him hovering on the brink of collapse. Before he knew it, 2 months had slipped by. New Year's Eve arrived, and all across America, streets glittered with fireworks and laughter. Tony watched the confetti drop on live television, then picked up his secure phone. He tapped the name of the one friend who'd shown him genuine kindness, Damien Ambalaka, and hit call. Almost instantly, Jarvis's cool voice chimed in, "Sir, Mr. Ambalaka declined the call in under 2 seconds." Tony lowered the phone, irritation flickering across his features. He'd expected Damien to answer, especially tonight. "Figures," he muttered, still as unreachable as ever. "Sir," Jarvis ventured, "he may assume you're calling because you need something from him, so he simply refused." Tony let out a bitter chuckle. "Jarvis, I didn't expect you to be so pragmatic about a New Year's call." There was a moment's pause. "My apologies, sir. Would you like me to attempt another call later?" Tony stared at the half-empty champagne flute on his desk, the room echoing with distant fireworks. "I don't know," he admitted. "If he really doesn't want to hear from me, maybe I should stop pestering him." "In my experience, sir, maintaining connections has its benefits," Jarvis replied gently. Tony set the glass down and sighed. "So, should we keep trying to reach him?" "Sir?" Jarvis prompted. Tony forced a small smile as another burst of fireworks lit the skyline. "Never mind. Let's just enjoy the night. He lifted the glass in a lazy toast. To new beginnings, Jarvis. Jarvis's tone softened just a touch. To new beginnings, sir. No, I'll find him myself. You can arrange for someone to prepare lunch. Tony Stark offered Damien Ambalaka a sharp look, then strode to his car and drove off alone. Damien lived in one of Brooklyn's wealthiest villa districts, not far from Stark Manor, so locating him was no challenge. 30 minutes later, Tony pulled up to a sprawling estate set on acres of meticulously landscaped grounds. He stepped from the car and pressed the ornate doorbell. Inside, Damien had already tapped into the camera feed and was watching the driveway projected on a wall. Spotting Tony, Damien opened the front door with a faint smile. Tony paused in the foyer, eyes sweeping over marble floors, gilded moldings, and towering pillars. He muttered under his breath, "This is ridiculous even for you." Stark Manor boasted its own luxury, but its true value lay hidden beneath the surface, sleek technology, secure labs, rather than in ostentatious decor. Damien's mansion, by contrast, seemed designed purely to flaunt wealth. Rooms lined with rare paintings, display cases of gleaming artifacts, and crystal chandeliers that could have illuminated half a city. Having already studied the estate's layout, Tony navigated the corridor without guidance until he reached a set of grand double doors. There, Damien stood waiting, arms casually crossed and curiosity flickering in his dark eyes. "Welcome, Mr. Stark," he said, stepping aside. "Shall we?" "Damien, it's New Year's Eve. Shouldn't you be home celebrating with Pepper? What are you doing here?" Before Tony Stark could finish, Damien stepped into the lab wearing sweatpants and a loose-fitting hoodie. "I figured you'd be alone tonight," he said with a grin. "Thought we might as well have some fun together." Tony leaned against his workbench, arms crossed. "Fun? Really? You wouldn't come all this way without a good reason." Damien waved a hand dismissively. "Fine. You guessed it. I had Jarvis prep lunch. Why don't you swing by my place? We can relax and catch up." Tony frowned, then cracked a smile. "You know, I just realized I've never actually invited you over before. All right, tell Jarvis to add 2 extra beef roasts and I'll be there." Damien laughed. "2 roasts? Don't worry, Tony. Even 10 wouldn't be too much." Tony slapped his chest in mock solemnity. "Perfect. I'll see you soon." Damien closed the door behind him with a polite nod. "All right, give me a few minutes to change." A short while later, he re-emerged, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that emphasized his tall, athletic frame. At home, he might lounge in casual clothes, but when stepping out, he always dressed to reflect his standing. He strode into the garage and scanned his options, settling on a discreet yet powerful silver BMW sedan. Tony Stark leaned against his own car, arms crossed, a half-smile on his face. "No wonder every debutante and socialite in New York is desperate for your invite. You've got that same charisma I had at your age." Damien slid into the driver's seat of the BMW, lowered the window, and shot Tony a teasing look. "Tony, if you spent less time chasing gossip and more time on your light bulb experiments, you'd have finished that prototype ages ago." With a playful shrug, Damien started the engine. The car purred to life, its chrome grille catching the morning sun as he eased out of the driveway, leaving Tony grinning in his wake. Damien eased back in the passenger seat, feigning disinterest. "It's really none of my business." Tony glanced over. "Pepper helps me run Stark Industries, manages our events, and let's be honest, answers endless questions about you. To the outside world, you and I are just friends. So people keep asking her, does Damien ever bring home any of those gorgeous younger women? You know, having a fling now and then, it's fun and it comes in handy socially. Why don't you ever take advantage?" Damien raised an eyebrow. "Seriously, you're worried about my love life?" Tony shrugged, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Come on, you're way more experienced at this than I am. Are these women nobodies you can toss aside when you're bored, or are they heiresses who help your connections?" Damien let out an exasperated sigh. "You and your gossip. Fine, none of your concern." Tony chuckled. "You know it is." Damien closed the window, cut the engine on his side, and said, "Let's go." He pulled away from the curb, and Tony fell in line behind him. Within half an hour, they rolled up the long drive to Stark Manor. Red lanterns swayed from the eaves, and paper banners fluttered along the fence. Pepper had already given the place a festive Lunar New Year makeover. The front doors swung open, and Pepper appeared, Her warm smile bright in the glow of the lanterns. "Damien Ambalaka, it's been too long." Damien hopped out of the car. "Happy New Year, Pepper. The place looks fantastic." Pepper's grin widened. "Come on in. Dad's been counting the minutes." "Long time no see, Pepper," Tony Stark greeted as he stepped into the lab. "Good to see you, Tony, and congratulations on the reactor improvements," Pepper Potts replied with a warm smile. Tony returned her nod. "Thanks, Pepper, but Damien and I need to go over some things in the workshop below. Mind waiting up here for a bit?" "Not at all," she said, turning back to her workstation. Tony led Damien down the curved staircase into the underground research chamber. The heavy doors slid shut behind them, and a soft hum filled the air. In the center of the room, a holographic periodic table sprang to life. "Welcome, Damien," Jarvis's calm voice announced. "Initializing element display." Tony studied the glowing chart, his brow creasing. He tapped a few controls, making the elements highlight and rearrange, but his expression only grew more frustrated. "I've run simulations on every possible candidate," he said, voice low. "There's nothing that can match palladium's properties. No viable substitute. Zero." He turned to Damien, desperation warring with hope in his eyes. "You once told me you were closing in on an alternative for the arc reactor. Do you still believe there's some undiscovered element out there that could replace palladium?" Damien's gaze sharpened. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "I do, and I've found a lead that might just prove it." A flicker of anticipation crossed Tony's face as Damien prepared to explain his breakthrough. Chapter 29, Tony's Advantages. Damien paced the length of Tony's workshop, eyes narrowing at a tangle of beakers, vials, and glowing metal samples strewn across the workbench. "There's nothing more I can do," Tony admitted, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I've tested every element in my database, run every simulation I know." Damien stopped in front of him, folding his arms. "If you don't look beyond the usual suspects, you'll never find a place to start. Are there elemental interactions out there, ones only superpowered individuals encounter, that I don't know about? Something you've never even heard of?" Tony glanced up, a flicker of frustration crossing his features. "This isn't about the sort of energy you or I can shield our bodies from. It's hard to explain. It's not impossible for me to tell you, but I need time to sort it all out." Damien studied him for a moment, then nodded. He'd thought they'd have to sit tight until S-Shield tracked Tony down and learned the nature of his problem before stepping in. But if Damien could nudge him in the right direction now, they might speed things along. "So it's nothing to do with the ordinary elements or energies we know. What if we think in terms of substitutions? Is there a rare isotope or an exotic material that behaves differently when bonded with certain compounds?" Tony's eyes lit up at the suggestion. He leaned over his workbench, scrolling through data on a holo display. Or maybe it's not just the element itself, but the chemical changes that occur during the bonding process. We could be looking at a catalyst that only forms under superhuman energy fields. Damien stepped closer to study the diagrams. If we can replicate those energy conditions in a controlled environment, we might coax out the right catalytic reaction. Even if it only exists for a split second, we could analyze it, stabilize it, or at least figure out why it's so elusive. Tony tapped his chin thoughtfully. "There might be a way. I'll need to recalibrate the vibrational frequency generator, push it into a range I've never dared try before. It'll be risky." "Worth it," Damien said firmly. "If we can pinpoint the missing link, we'll get you that sustainable power source you need." Tony shot Damien a grateful look. "All right, let's get to work." As they set to adjusting the machinery, an almost palpable buzz of anticipation filled the lab. Two brilliant minds, tackling the impossible, together. Damien stood in Stark's workshop, eyes fixed on the pulsing blue glow of the arc reactor embedded in his chest. Tony Stark leaned over a workbench cluttered with tools and fragments of prototype armor plates. "Palladium just isn't cutting it anymore," Tony said. "Instead of shoehorning another palladium core in there, I want to develop an entirely new element, one that'll stabilize your reactor and crank your armor's output through the roof." Damien frowned. "A new element? You want me to, discover an element from scratch?" Tony tapped a finger against his chin. "Hear me out. Your father was a brilliant scientist, just like me. Maybe there's something in his old notes that could point us in the right direction. Damien's heart skipped. My father's notes? He left in such a hurry. There wasn't anything. No journals, no prototypes, nothing. Tony's expression darkened for the first time since Damien had arrived. He spread his hands, dismissing the scattered schematics between them. He did leave you something, Damien, not just the company and its assets, but a legacy. Let's not forget how Stark Industries was originally founded, and who your father collaborated with most closely. Damien's jaw tightened. He didn't need to say it aloud. He only needed to look at Tony. Stark's eyes narrowed as he pieced it together. The hidden partnership, the clandestine research that had powered the earliest ARC prototypes. After a moment's thought, Tony let out a low whistle. You might be onto something, he said. All right, time to dive into the archives. With that, the two of them turned toward a wall lined with hollow screens and digital files, ready to unearth the secret that could forge a brand new element and give Damien's armor the edge it desperately needed. Damien paced the length of Tony Stark's private conference room, arms folded. Because of the arc reactor incident, he said, Stark Industries' relationship with the military isn't what it used to be. I need to recover the gear my father left behind. Where do I even start? Tony swiveled in his chair, fingers steepled. Given how things stand, approaching the Pentagon directly would be difficult. Your personal conflicts with them haven't exactly helped. Damien glanced up. Is there anyone else in uniform who might be willing to help? Someone who's already offered to lend a hand? Tony's lips curved in a half smirk. You mean the Homeland Security Bureau? They quietly reached out, said they'd pitch in. Really? Damien cocked an eyebrow. Are they powerful enough to make this happen? Tony shrugged. They claim they'll cover your request for $20 million worth of equipment. In their books, that's a big deal. Even though, between us, that's pocket change for most major contractors. Trust me, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel over there. Damien exhaled slowly. The prospect was hardly reassuring, but if the Bureau had the pull to get his father's relics back, he'd take it. Fine, I'll contact them, he said. But if they try anything funny, you owe me more than a Stark Industries email signature. Tony leaned back, tapping a few commands into his holographic interface. Deal. Welcome to the wonderful world of bureaucratic fundraising. Damien listened as Tony outlined the situation. The Bureau of Land and Resources is practically bleeding dry, Tony explained, rubbing his temples. On paper, they're agents, but in reality, they're just overworked field operatives scrambling for funding. Damien nodded. He'd heard rumors that someone had offered $20 million in support, an amount so large it required a formal application and multiple approvals. He also knew that Tony was hinting at Nick Fury quietly funneling funds. They're strapped for cash, Damien said, but they claim to specialize in handling unusual incidents. If that's true, they must still have some pull with the military. Tony gave him a wry smile. Whether they do or not, you'll find out as soon as you ask. Got it, I'll reach out. Damien squared his shoulders, ready to make the call. Tony leaned back in his chair. Jarvis, get Coulson on the line. Right away, sir. The onboard AI's voice was calm and efficient. Less than 5 seconds later, Director Phil Coulson's voice crackled through the lab's speakers. Mr. Stark, Agent Coulson here. How can I be of service? The response was so prompt that Tony shot Damien an amused look. Damien returned a half grin, but deliberately looked away, pretending not to notice the silent exchange. The gears were already in motion, and the next move was up to him. Agent Coulson, my father, Howard Stark, had extensive ties with the military back in the day. He collaborated on countless top-secret projects. Do you know if any of his equipment or research is still locked away in a Department of Defense archive? There was a momentary pause on Coulson's end. Then he replied, Give me an hour. I'll dig through their manifests and see if any Stark-branded tech hasn't been turned over yet. Tony let out a relieved breath. Thank you, Coulson. I really appreciate it. He glanced over at Damien, who had been watching the call with keen interest. And when you find something, send it straight to me. Consider it done, Coulson said, his voice steadier than his expression. The line clicked dead, and for a split second, the ever-measured agent allowed himself a small, triumphant grin, like a kid who just discovered a shortcut to the candy store. Damien raised an eyebrow. Coulson's excitement was practically fluorescent. Tony smirked. Agent Coulson, take it easy. You're giving new meaning to high octane. Coulson just chuckled and shook his head. Tony turned back to Damien, his face serious again. All right, kid, let's get ready. We've got relics to uncover. Damien Ambalaka leaned back in his chair, arms folded, his expression cool. You know the rule, he said quietly. If you want something, you always pay a price. Tony Stark toyed with a metal component on the workbench. All I'm asking is to return your father's remaining relics, he replied. That's the favor. How big it is depends entirely on you. Damien lifted an eyebrow. Restoring them to me is one thing, he said, but what if I uncover new discoveries in my father's designs? Tony's grin was unapologetically arrogant. Then let's call it even when I enhance the arc reactor. A half-smile flickered across Damien's face. If you really pull that off, I won't forget you were the one who reminded me, Mr. Stark. It's honestly no big deal, Tony waved off, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of genuine regard. Beneath the billionaire playboy's narcissism and sharp tongue lay a simple truth. He never forgot a kindness. And when the moment came, he'd find a way to repay the debt. Damien didn't mind giving his friend a little push. It looks like the chapter text didn't come through. Could you please paste the machine-translated chapter here? Once I have it, I'll rewrite it into smooth, idiomatic English, renaming the main character to Damien and ensuring he's clearly portrayed as male, while preserving all the plot details and tone. Chapter 30, A Rare Opportunity. Tony Stark leaned back in his chair, studying Damien Ambalaka with a thoughtful expression. Damien, may I ask you something? He paused, then added, Tell me what's on your mind, and I'll see what I can do. Damien's eyes flickered as he weighed his words. After a moment he spoke. Ever since you treated me last time, my health has gone through the roof. I actually look several years younger, and my stamina and strength have increased beyond anything I've ever experienced. He folded his arms across his chest. I have to ask, did your procedure only reverse my apparent age, or is it also boosting my physical fitness? Tony's gaze shifted away for the briefest instant, as if he were choosing his words carefully. I've felt it every day since the treatment, he admitted. My senses are sharper, my strength and endurance have jumped to levels that dwarf any Olympic athlete. Granted, I'm not regenerating at superhuman speed, but compared to a normal man, my recovery, my overall performance, is nothing short of extraordinary. Honestly, if I'd tried to pull all-nighters and work non-stop before, this 38-year-old frame would have crumpled long ago. After Damien Ambalaka's treatment, Tony needed only 3 or 4 hours of sleep each night to banish any fatigue and sustain peak energy levels. His mind felt sharper than ever, which explained how he'd managed to overhaul and refine his steel armor non-stop for the past 2 months. Best of all, there were no lingering side effects. That's when Tony realized Damien's gift was far more potent than mere healing or rejuvenation. It actually strengthened the body itself, and the enhancement endured rather than fading away. The last time Damien had treated him, Tony had vaulted over 2 meters in a single bound without breaking a sweat. What if Damien's true goal wasn't just to restore him or give him a temporary edge, but to fundamentally elevate his physiology? All of it achievable without time-consuming genetic therapies or ethically dubious experiments. Tony, didn't I already tell you that if you want something, you have to be prepared to pay the price? So no matter how hard you wish for it, having the best of both worlds is out of the question. Damien watched Tony Stark's face fall as he spoke. Of course, Tony wanted a physique far beyond his current one, yet he also demanded to keep his familiar appearance, afraid that anyone would notice if he changed. It was a fantasy. Even Damien himself hadn't been able to preserve his looks after tapping into the system and awakening the power of the void. 3 years had passed since that day, and he still looked exactly as he had the moment he first harnessed that otherworldly force. He knew this stasis would last not only for 3 years, but for 10, 50, or even 100 more. The void's energy had altered his very life essence, severing him from the natural course of human aging. Sooner or later, the truth of his inhuman nature would slip through any disguise he donned. But by then, Damien's power would have grown so vast that exposure would be the least of his concerns. Tony Stark frowned, disappointment shadowing his features. Is there really nothing you can do? Damien shook his head, his tone measured. I should have told you sooner, Tony. What I have isn't a typical superpower, at least not one you'd recognize. It's something beyond your understanding. You could call it a superpower in a loose sense, but it works very differently. Tony crossed his arms. If it isn't a superpower, what exactly is it? Damien chose his words carefully. Right now, your strength hasn't broken human limits. Instead, it's granted you extraordinary physical resilience. For someone like you, an ordinary person in peak condition, that alone is more than enough. He let that sink in, then continued softly. But if you want to go further, your biology would surpass all human norms. Your lifespan could stretch into centuries or even 1,000 years. A faint, confident smile played at Damien's lips. I can make it happen, give you abilities you can't even imagine. To me, it's just another afternoon experiment. Tony's eyes narrowed. And you're sure I'm prepared for that? Damien met his gaze without flinching. After a beat, he said, I'm ready if you are. Can I have power like yours, amazing raw power, without relying on technology? Damien asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and awe. Tony Stark paused, his brow rising in surprise. He studied Damien for a long moment before answering. You can learn to wield tremendous power, but don't kid yourself. You'll never match me. Damien frowned. Why not? What's the difference? Tony shook his head slightly, offering no further explanation. If you're serious about unlocking that strength, you'll discover the reason for yourself in time. Damien nodded slowly. He wasn't deliberately withholding information. He simply didn't know what shape Tony's powers would take once he embraced the void. Damien himself had evolved his own abilities 283 times already. That kind of power was staggering, but it was only the beginning. There was no way Tony could catch up yet. Tony fell silent, lost in thought. Extraordinary strength earned respect everywhere, just as world-class athletes draw admiration for shattering records. Power like that didn't intimidate people, it inspired them. Yet Tony's mind was on the road ahead, the challenges Damien would face and the mysteries waiting to be revealed once he took that first step into the unknown. Once you transcend the bounds of ordinary human strength, people start to regard you as something unearthly and fear you. Damien had asked the power-granting entity a simple favor, bolster his body, but without making him look like a child, so no one would immediately spot that he was an anomaly. Moments ago, he'd posed that exact question, but the answer had been unequivocal. Impossible. Yet who wouldn't dream of a lifespan measured in centuries, and abilities so far beyond normal comprehension? Fantasy novels and blockbuster movies thrive on that same wish. Now that the chance to claim such power had fallen into his lap, Damien found himself torn. If he accepted, Pepper, the one person he admired and trusted above all, might look at him in horror. A life of endless youth sounded like a fairy tale come true, but he pictured himself forever frozen in time while everyone he cared about aged and died around him. The mere thought brought a wave of sorrow. Still, to turn this offer down would mean letting the most extraordinary opportunity of his life slip away. Damien stood at the crossroads of fear and hope, haunted by what might be gained and what would inevitably be lost. Chapter 31. Asking about relics. Damien shook his head. I'm done talking about that. Let's head upstairs and discuss something else. Tony Stark looked up, a wry smile on his face. Actually, there's one more thing. Could you do me a favor and talk to Paybo for me? Damien arched an eyebrow. You want me to put in a good word? Exactly, Tony said. And don't worry, I haven't told her anything about our conversation down here. She has no idea what we've been up to. Damien studied him for a moment. Paybo's fond of you, sure, but she doesn't have an endless bankroll. If you're expecting her to bankroll your next project, you're going to be disappointed. Tony waved him off. Believe me, I'm not after her money. And as for flirting, it's never been my thing. I'd rather wait for someone to make the first move. Damien sighed and spread his hands. Fine. Just don't lead her on, and you have my blessing. Let's go. Tony let out a relieved chuckle. He turned toward the stairs leading out of the underground lab, ready to follow Damien out, when a voice crackled over the comlink. Sir, Mr. Coulson is on the line. Jarvis chimed softly. Sir, incoming call from S. Ild. Would you like to accept? Tony Stark paused on the stairs, surprised. That fast? I just spoke with Coulson. He'd expected Agent Phil Coulson to drag out their investigation of his father's relics, maybe to ingratiate himself, but the call came back in under 10 minutes. Clearly, S.H.I.E.L.D. had made some progress. Damien, standing just behind Tony, leaned forward. Go ahead and answer it. Tony tapped the console. Instantly, the audio feed switched to video. Phil Coulson appeared in his office, flanked by a tall, broad-shouldered man in a black trench coat and a single eye patch. The stranger glanced first at Coulson, then at Damien. The light in his eye flickered with recognition. Tony Stark, the man said smoothly. It's a pleasure to meet you face to face. He shifted his attention to Damien and extended a gloved hand. I'm Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Coulson's supervisor. Fury's gaze was steady as he addressed Damien directly. And you must be Damien Ambalaka. I understand one of our agents offended you in your last encounter. On behalf of S.H.I.E.L.D., I apologize. Damien inclined his head. Thank you, Director Fury. I appreciate it. Coulson managed a small, relieved smile, while Tony folded his arms, curiosity flickering across his face as he watched the exchange. Damien Ambalaka lounged in one of Stark Manor's sleek conference chairs, casually scrolling on his phone. Across the table, Nick Fury and Tony Stark were finishing up a discussion about the agency's new name. Tony arched an eyebrow. Director Fury, S.H.I.E.L.D.? Didn't you used to call yourselves the Bureau of Land and Resources? Fury offered a half smile. You can call me Fury. Fair enough, Tony leaned forward. But it wasn't just me who thought your old name was too long. Damien here said the same thing. Damien glanced up. I did. Bureau of Land and Resources sounds like a gardening club. Precisely, Fury said, nodding. So we went back to the drawing board. After a lot of brainstorming, we landed on S.H.I.E.L.D., Strategic Hazard Intervention, Espionage Logistics Directorate. Tony snorted. Strategic Hazard Intervention. Nice acronym. Reassuring? Maybe not, but at least it's shorter. Shorter and more memorable, Fury agreed. Though I can't guarantee everyone will feel comforted by it. Tony grinned. Memorable, huh? Unless I'm dodging a missile, I'll probably forget it by tomorrow. Damien chuckled and went right back to his phone. Fury let out a quiet sigh. He remembered how brusque Natasha Romanoff had been when she first met Damien. No wonder the young investor was indifferent now. Still, given Damien's sizable stake in Stark Industries, Fury wasn't surprised to find him here. For his part, Damien Ambalaka had become one of Stark's largest shareholders, and even if he was more interested in his screen than in their conversation, everyone knew he was listening. Everyone in New York's high society has noticed the unlikely friendship between Damien and Tony Stark. Damien may not have any superhuman abilities, but he's never lacked for good fortune. Some might even say he's blessed by Lady Luck herself. Wealthy, well-connected, and with a knack for living on the edge, the two men quickly discovered they had more in common than they expected. Today, they sit across from Nick Fury in a secure S.H.I.E.L.D. briefing room, the tension as polished as the chrome table between them. Fury folds his hands, leans forward, and fixes Tony with a steely gaze. Let's skip the introductions, he says. We've recovered some of your father Howard Stark's personal effects. The problem is, much of what he kept has been designated top-secret military material. Getting it back to you isn't going to be a simple handover. Tony watches Fury coolly. I understand the classification issues. My father's legacy and his property should rightfully come to me. Fury nods, then taps the dossier in front of him. I appreciate that, but before we release these items, I need something from you. Tony arches an eyebrow. You have my attention. Leaning back, Fury allows himself the barest hint of a smile. You're 39 years old now, at the height of your powers and influence. I'm going to call on that experience. Are you ready to do what it takes? Nick Fury leaned back in his chair, studying Tony. All these years, you never thought to ask the military if any of your father's work or any of his prototypes had survived. Tony frowned. Across the table, Damien Ambalaka, his longtime friend and confidant, raised an eyebrow. Now that you mention it, why not? Fury shook his head. Because of this. He nodded toward Tony's chest. With a practiced motion, Tony Stark opened his jacket and shirt to reveal the glowing arc reactor embedded over his heart. The blue-white light pulsed steadily. Damien had been the one to remind Tony to check on his father's research, but Tony admitted it wasn't that reminder that made him finally ask. It was the reactor itself. This, Tony said, tapping the smooth glass surface, is the arc reactor. It's what powers my suit and what kept me alive in that cave. He paused, eyes distant. I've tried to build a new one, tested dozens of elements, scoured the periodic table, hoping to find something cleaner, something I could remove when I wanted to be just me. But nothing worked, he swallowed. Then I thought of my father. He was as brilliant an inventor as I am, maybe more so. If anyone left behind a clue, be it a schematic, a lab notebook, even a scrap of experimental metal, it would be him. I hoped his work might inspire a replacement element. Tony closed his shirt and faced Fury and Damien. His expression was equal parts determination and desperation. So that's why I needed to ask about my dad's relics. I'm running out of options and time. I understand. I'll have Coulson send it right away. I hope your father's relics prove useful, Nick Fury added, his gaze locked on the arc reactor's pale glow against Tony Stark's chest. If Stark couldn't synthesize a new element, S-Shield did have a treatment that could slow the palladium poisoning, but only as a temporary measure. It was like applying a bandage to a bleeding wound. It staunched the flow, but never healed the source. If Tony wanted to live, he'd have to uncover a true solution himself. Tony's eyes drifted to his armor, sleek, steel-plated, and packing more firepower than a squadron of fighter jets. It moved with lightning speed, protected him from ruinous force, and yet remained no substitute for genuine superhuman strength. Without it, he was just a man in a bleeding city. Fury gave a curt nod. You're one of our best hopes. We can't afford to lose you. Tony took a steadying breath, the tension on his face easing as resolve settled in his eyes. I'll find a way, as soon as possible. Chapter 32. I have enough money to buy my life. Nick Fury leaned forward across the conference table, his one good eye fixed on Damien Ambalaka. Mr. Ambalaka, on behalf of S-Shield, I offer you our sincere apologies for any offense we've caused. We mean no antagonism. Damien shrugged, his expression unreadable. I don't care about your apologies, he said coolly. Just don't bother me again. This so-called great mission to save Blue Star, or whatever you call it, has nothing to do with an ordinary guy like me. Fury's eyebrow twitched. He pushed back his chair and stood, studying Damien in the overhead light. You say you're just an ordinary person, but you've managed to inconvenience S-Shield more than once. He paused. You strike me as someone who might have a special set of skills. A faint smirk curved Damien's lips. Depends how you define special skills. If you had the right connections, like your buddy Tony Stark, you could commandeer a suit of armor and call yourself a superhero too. Under the table, Fury's hand drifted to his hip, nearly touching the holster beneath his jacket. He remained outwardly calm. Inside, he was recalculating. According to his files, Stark rarely invited men to his Malibu home. If he reached out to Fury personally, it meant something, and Stark was famously reluctant to share his Iron Man technology with the military. But for a friend he trusted, well, Fury tapped into every bit of resolve not to let that surprise show on his face. Maybe, Fury said at last, his tone casual, or maybe the world needs more people who think twice before they call themselves heroes. He offered a thin smile. Anyway, if you have any more grand plans for a great mission, let us know. We can decide whether it's worth the trouble. Damien inclined his head. We'll see. With that, he rose and walked out, leaving Fury alone with his thoughts, and a realization that this ordinary man might not be so ordinary after all. Nick Fury caught the glint in Tony Stark's eyes. Stark very much wanted to see Damien Umbaraka slip into the armor. Fury nodded inwardly. His hunch was confirmed. He turned to Damien with measured calm. Let's be clear, it's your choice whether to wear the armor. And whoever said that putting it on automatically makes you a superhero? Damien bristled, arms crossed. Save me the lecture, Fury. Your high-minded speech isn't exactly subtle moral coercion, is it? Tony's jaw tightened at the edge of the room. He'd hoped Damien would suit up without all this friction. Fury felt a flicker of annoyance at the young man's bluntness. He'd been cordial only because Stark wanted him to be, but he forced his expression back into a professional smile. Damien, he said evenly, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Let's talk this through. He kept his voice friendly and composed, determined to diffuse the tension and find common ground. Damien folded his arms and leveled a cool stare at Nick Fury. "I have nothing to discuss with you. The last time your agents drew a gun on me, I reported them to the FBI, and your own people stepped in to smooth everything over. I don't owe S.H.I.E.L.D. anything, so why won't you leave me alone? And if you try to strong-arm me again, I assure you I have more than enough money to protect my life." Fury's jaw tightened, his lips curling into a sneer. Tony Stark, standing beside him, caught the exchange in stunned silence. He glanced from Fury to Damien, incredulous. Tony had known S.H.I.E.L.D. was interested in recruiting the reclusive businessman. He'd even suspected they might try a little intimidation, but he'd never imagined they'd pull a gun just to test him. Nick Fury ran a hand over his temple, fighting a surge of irritation. He hadn't foreseen that Natasha's earlier undercover operation would leave Damien so fiercely resentful of his organization. He certainly hadn't expected that Tony Stark, the private inventor more accustomed to lab coats than battlefields, would unveil a suit of armor capable of rewriting the rules of warfare. And he never could. Av predicted that Damien Ambalaka, of all people, would form such an unlikely alliance with the armored man. Damien's words left no doubt. He knows exactly what, or who, lurks on the dark web. If things go sideways, he won't hesitate to spend whatever it takes to save us. And it isn't just about the money. Rumor has it that the so-called death gods on that shadowy network will torture or kill for a price, even skin you alive. Scrounging together $20 million might sound daunting, until you remember Damien is a billionaire. To him, it's pocket change. Young, brash, and fearless as he is, he might well throw every caution to the wind. On the holoscreen, Nick Fury lowered his gaze. "Mr. Ambalaka, I sincerely apologize for our agent's misconduct. We don't see you as an enemy. I hope, when the dust settles, you'll allow us to clear up this misunderstanding." He tapped the console, and the feed blinked out. Tony Stark leaned in, whistled, and gave an impressed nod. "That kid's got guts," he said. "Not afraid of a shield, and he's got the resources to back it up." Damien never considered unmasking himself. He preferred the straightforward solution befitting a young man of means. "There's nothing glamorous or sinister in this," he said evenly. "It's simply a matter of preserving my identity and image." Tony Stark nodded. "Understood. But have you ever actually worn powered armor before?" Damien leaned back, confidence in his voice. "I've already got plenty of experience in steel-frame suits. Honestly, once you learn the systems, a pilot with your instincts would be even more capable than I am." Tony's eyes sparkled with excitement. He didn't know exactly how formidable Damien's talents were, but he was certain the newcomer was no lightweight. "If you're game, I'd love to spar sometime." Damien's gaze drifted to the sleek armor resting against the innermost wall of the workshop. He considered the gleaming red and gold plates for a moment, then met Tony's eyes. "Why wait? Let me take one now. Having a suit at my disposal not only provides self-protection, but also makes it easier to keep my true identity under wraps." Tony's grin widened as he strode over to the armor rack. "Smart move. Let's get you suited up." "Tony Stark, I understand where you're coming from," Damien said, leaning back in his chair. "If you avoid shelling out S.H.I.E.L.D.'s own money to cover their mistakes, they have no real grounds to move against you. After all, they're the ones at fault here." Tony Stark ran a hand through his hair. "Exactly. But if I do step in, if I use my resources to save anyone in S.H.I.E.L.D., it blows my cover. Then they'll accuse me of stockpiling dangerous weapons, and before I know it, I'm under their microscope." Damien shook his head. He'd already reminded Tony of these pitfalls more times than he could count. Each time, Tony had bristled, so much so that he'd offered Damien a favor in return. Damien didn't need anything. The gesture alone was enough. "Point taken," Damien replied, his tone softening. "I'm not lacking for anything. Knowing you wanted to pay me back, that's reward enough." Tony fell silent for a moment, eyes fixed on the sleek lines of the arc reactor glowing faintly at his chest. "We're both among the richest men in New York," he said finally. "But there's a key difference between us. So long as I'm alive, Stark Industries remains America's leading tech pioneer. Our armor gives me, well, it gives us, a shield they can't breach directly. All they'll have left is some flimsy excuse to pin on me." Damien nodded. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was the best defense they had. And for now, that would have to be enough. For instance, pressure from public opinion or any other form of leverage might force him to surrender what he's determined to keep. As it stands, the military has no legitimate grounds to demand his prototypes, so every suit of steel armor remains under Damien's control. They simply can't push him too hard. He's a New York magnate and a bona fide scientific genius. On the surface, Damien Ambella appears to be nothing more than a wealthy industrialist. Yet money alone can't match true power, and at the moment, he's not negotiating with S.H.I.E.L.D. Still, Damien has never crossed the line into outright danger. He's never brandished a weapon that would earn him a threat designation. That's precisely why Nick Fury and his agents have little recourse against him. Chapter 33. Does he hate me? Let's head upstairs and eat, Damien said to Tony Stark with a knowing glance. Sure, Tony replied, then led the way to the second-floor restaurant. It was New Year's Eve, and Tony had arranged a lavish spread in honor of the holiday. He'd anticipated a festive dinner with Damien Ambella, so much so that he'd gone all out. After arriving, however, Damien surprised everyone by requesting not one but 2 full roast beef feasts. The tables groaned under the weight of platters. It looked more like a high-end buffet than a private dinner. Pepper Potts greeted them with a warm smile as they stepped in. Mr. Ambella, the roast beef platters will need another half-hour or so in the oven. In the meantime, please help yourselves to these appetizers. Plates are over there. Pepper had been stunned when she first saw Damien charge through the main dining hall and devour 100 guests' portions without breaking a sweat. His prodigious appetite had given her a whole new respect for him. So when Tony mentioned ordering 2 extra beef feasts, she simply nodded, no longer surprised by his legendary hunger. Please, Miss Potts. Damien smiled and nodded. Go ahead, dig in. We've got another visitor coming later. Tony Stark seized his chance, grabbing a clean plate and loading it with food. As he settled into his chair, he asked casually, So, who else is coming? A guy or a girl? Pepper Potts waved off the formality and filled her plate with her favorite dishes before slipping into her seat. Damien carried 2 plates over to the table and set them down. Phil Coulson. He's bringing me something later. Tony arched an eyebrow and leaned back. Coulson again? Why is he showing up every time we head down there? Pepper paused mid-bite, fork hovering. Wait, head down there? What exactly are you 2 doing? Tony gave Damien a knowing look. Isn't Coulson the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who handles weird incidents? You're not telling me this has to do with strange events, are you? Pepper's curiosity flared. She set her fork aside. Come on, give me something, anything. You're completely keeping me in the dark. Damien met her gaze evenly, expression unchanged. Between Tony's raised brows and Pepper's pleading stare, the silence only grew heavier. Damien calmly took a bite of salad, leaving his friends to wonder what secret he was hiding. Don't you have plenty of questions for Damien Ambella? Tony Stark prompted, shifting the conversation. Damien set down his fork and offered a polite smile. Mr. Stark, I primarily work in the stock market. Real estate is just a sideline. Pepper Potts let her gaze flicker from Tony to Damien. So you're not a developer? Not in the classic sense, Damien replied. I don't have the necessary military or governmental ties to obtain land development permits. Instead, I acquire existing properties across the country and wait for their values to rise. He took a final bite of his salad and leaned back, watching their reactions. Pepper blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. She and Tony had heard rumors of his uncanny business acumen, but his casual explanation only deepened the mystery. Tony chuckled softly. I still don't understand half of his methods, Pepper. Don't lose any sleep over it. He turned his eyes back to Damien. Beneath that unassuming calm lay an empire, over 100 estates, each valued at more than $10 million, scattered from coast to coast. And at the heart of it all stood the Grand Manor where Damien preferred to reside, his favorite trophy of many. Even without stepping inside, Tony could tell that Damien Ambella's New York estate was worth at least a few $100 million. Prime land, exquisite decor, and every conceivable luxury amenity. What astonished him most was that this was just one of 57 villas and townhouses Damien owned across the city. He'd quietly acquired even more properties in other states and abroad, ensuring a comfortable haven wherever he traveled. Tony understood the logic of real estate investment, especially in a growing metropolis like New York, where property values rise almost without fail. But he also knew Damien's uncanny talent for the stock market. If he'd poured all that capital into equities, his returns could have outstripped any gains from bricks and mortar. Yet every title deed bore Damien's name, reinforcing the widespread assumption that his empire was equally rooted in real estate and securities trading. In truth, Tony convinced himself Damien was simply being discreet, letting his holdings speak for themselves rather than flaunting his wealth. "Sir," the butler's voice broke the silence, "Mr. Ambalaka is ready to receive you in the drawing room." "Damien Ambalaka, Tony's told me you've been fielding a lot of questions," Pepper said, sounding both amused and exasperated. "How am I supposed to choose which of these galas I can actually attend?" she added, folding her arms. Pepper glanced at Tony, then turned back to Damien. "I've been drowning in invitations lately. It's getting a little out of hand." Damien looked at her calmly. "Just tell them you're unavailable. I'll word it so it doesn't sound rude." Pepper blinked at the straightforward refusal, then broke into a relieved smile. Rumor in New York had it that Damien Ambalaka was quite the playboy, yet here he was, clueless about the social scene. At least, he didn't seem interested in impressing every debutante in town. "I appreciate that," she said, nodding. "No more pointless tea parties or dress fittings for me." "Consider it done, Miss Pepper," Damien replied, politeness threaded through his tone. With that, he picked up the last tray of hors d'oeuvres and headed for the buffet tables, where platters of smoked salmon and mini beef Wellington waited. As he rearranged a row of champagne flutes, he glanced back at Tony, who was leaning against the counter with his trademark grin. "Tony," Damien called over his shoulder, "does Mr. Stark have any last-minute requests for tonight's banquet?" Pepper hovered by the serving table, her voice barely above a whisper, as she watched Damien Ambalaka step away to fetch more food. "Do you think he actually hates me?" Tony Stark, whose extremis-enhanced hearing was sharper than ever, caught her question at once. He offered a reassuring smile. If he really despised you, he wouldn't bother with politeness. He'd just glare or walk off without a word. Right now, he's just topping off his plate. Pepper bit her lip. "So, if I'm not seeing overt disgust, I shouldn't read into it?" Tony nodded. "Exactly. Damien's proud to the point of arrogance. He once bluntly called Obadiah Stane garbage and treated Nick Fury without so much as a hint of deference. If he didn't want to talk to you, he wouldn't even pretend to be civil." Pepper watched Damien calmly load vegetables onto his plate, his expression neutral. Relief washed over her features. "Okay," she whispered. "I guess that makes sense." Tony clapped her shoulder. "Trust me, he's just hungry." Damien placed another dish on the table and leaned back in his chair with an easy smile. "Miss Pepper, how does it feel to be running Stark Industries now?" Pepper rubbed her temples, a faint crease between her brows. Since taking over the company on New Year's Day, every moment had been controlled by Tony's relentless R&D deadlines and endless strategy meetings. She'd envisioned a seamless transition, but reality had her scrambling from one crisis to the next. "Honestly," she sighed, "I don't feel like I have any real say in which direction Stark Industries goes. Tony's already locked in on the next big pivot, and I'm just trying to keep up." Damien chuckled softly as he began to serve himself. "Fair enough, but today's the first day of the year. No talk of stocks, no talk of long-term roadmaps. Let yourself rest." He watched her, sympathy in his eyes. "If you don't want to discuss work issues, I won't press. Just enjoy your meal." With that, he picked up his fork and dove into the steaming dishes before them, leaving Pepper to breathe a small, grateful sigh or relief. Pepper Potts has been by Tony Stark's side since she was a teenager, managing every aspect of his life, both the mundane and the spectacular. She may tease him, complain when he's reckless, and occasionally let her softer side show, but she always comes back to the same conclusion. She trusts Tony and will stand by him. Over the years, their bond has deepened into something Tony can't live without, a tether that finally convinced him to give up his playboy ways and consider marriage. Now, on the cusp of a transformation that could grant him extraordinary new abilities, Tony hesitates. It isn't fear of the power itself, but concern for how Pepper might react. Damien had already guessed this well before Tony voiced it. When Tony finally asked if Damien could grant Pepper an extended lifespan, along with the remarkable powers that come from the void, Damien wasn't taken aback. To Damien, this is the ideal arrangement. More believers drawn into the void strengthen its energy, while each new initiate gains longevity and incredible gifts. It's a true win-win scenario. He never doubted his ability to persuade people to join the void. After all, its promise has never been stronger than it is today. He'd been at this so long, it was enough to drive anyone mad. "I want to build an arc reactor that nobody else can reverse engineer," Tony declared, eyes blazing with determination. "I've got a few new concepts that might finally work," he added. "Just give me a little more time." Pepper Potts squeezed his arm reassuringly. She understood all too well why he felt the pressure. Stark Industries was in the midst of a major pivot, and without a breakthrough power source, the shareholders were getting restless. If Tony's design ever leaked, competitors would dissect it and copy it in no time. There was simply no way to unveil the reactor yet. "Tony," she said softly, "you don't have to shoulder all the stress alone. We're breaking new ground here, not retracing old steps. Take whatever time you need." Tony managed a tired smile. "Thanks, Pepper. I hate seeing a rare day off go to waste. I'm sorry if I snapped at you." Pepper let out a gentle laugh. "You really know how to make me smile, Mr. Ambulaka." Damien's eyebrows shot up at the unexpected name. Pepper had switched on him, and for a moment the room grew still. Then he cleared his throat. "I didn't mean to let my own frustration spill over onto you," he said quietly. "My reaction was over the top." Pepper looked up, a faint flush coloring her cheeks. "It's okay," she murmured, her embarrassment softened by relief. "I know, it's no small feat to helm a company the size of Stark Industries." Damien tilted his head, a faint shrug betraying his indifference. Then he spoke. Chapter 34, Psychological Problems. The mood at the table brightened noticeably after Damien's last remark. A few moments of easy conversation passed before Pepper leaned forward, her curiosity getting the better of her. "So, Damien," she said, "what qualities do you look for in a woman? I'm genuinely interested. How do you decide?" Tony Stark flashed his trademark grin. "Yeah, come on, spill it. Which traits make your heart skip a beat?" Damien paused, gathering his thoughts. "There are 3 things I value most: beauty, intelligence, and inner strength." Pepper lifted an eyebrow. "Beauty and brains I understand," she said. "But what do you mean by inner strength?" He shrugged lightly. "Anyone can be good-looking or book-smart, but someone who can stay composed and resolute under pressure, that's rare. On the surface, women can be just as tough as men, yet far too many crack when life really tests them." Tony snorted. "So, you're saying most women aren't up to the task?" "Not at all," Damien replied. "I've met plenty who meet the first 2 criteria. But true emotional resilience? It's uncommon. I admit I sometimes date on a whim, but I'm not trying to find a flawless partner every time. I want someone who can stand by me, no matter what comes our way." Pepper considered his words thoughtfully, while Tony studied Damien with a skeptical glint in his eye. Damien's standards were clear, and perhaps they hinted at something deeper about his own steadfast resolve. Damien Ambalaka's first criterion for a partner was the simplest of all: physical beauty. But his second requirement, intelligence, ran much deeper than mere book smarts. He wanted someone who could read his mind in a few words, someone who instinctively knew when to speak and when to remain silent, what to do and what to leave undone. That alone eliminated countless candidates. And when Damien spoke of strength, he meant more than emotional resilience. He sought someone with enough physical and mental fortitude to match his own pace. Without that, she wouldn't just fail to support him, she wouldn't even be able to follow his lead. Tony Stark listened, brows furrowed. After a moment's thought, he shook his head. "You're setting the bar pretty high. I doubt there's anyone in the world who fits all those requirements." Damien smiled. "I know, but I've got time. Even if I never find her, the search will be worth it." "Your words are far too absolute," Pepper Potts cut in, arms crossed. Tony Stark held up a hand. "Pepper, you're missing my point." Pepper bristled. "You're demanding impossibly high standards. There are plenty of women who are beautiful, intelligent, and strong. Why exclude them all?" Tony shot a quick glance at Damien, curious how he'd react. Damien met his gaze and offered a small, knowing smile. Tony wondered, was Damien hinting that Pepper might indeed possess what they sought, or was he reading too much into it? Finally, Tony faced Pepper again. "Is it possible for you?" he asked, his tone no longer teasing, but genuinely inquisitive. Damien leaned forward. "It all depends on whether she can convince you," he said, his voice measured. Tony nodded slowly. "Then she's welcome to try." Damien's smile grew confident. "Give me a little time. I'd like to talk with her first." Tony watched Damien for a moment, realizing that Pepper might just have a real shot after all. Even if he'd have to fight for it, this was undeniably good news. Damien Ambalaka shrugged, an unreadable look on his face, then resumed polishing off the food before him with swift efficiency. "What are you two talking about?" he asked without looking up. "Who is she?" Tony Stark leaned in, eyes dancing with mischief. "Is she your ideal woman, Mr. Ambalaka?" Pepper Potts chimed in, frowning at the vague exchange between her boss and Tony. Tony gave her a crooked smile. "I'll explain soon enough, Pep. Just not right now. First, I've got to make sure Damien's okay with it, and ultimately he's the one who decides." Pepper's curiosity sharpened at that. "What do you mean? What's going on, Tony?" He held up a hand in a half-apology. "Let's just say I've been discussing a pretty radical upgrade, something that might let you stand alongside Damien as a transcendent being. But until both of us agree, it's all off the record." Damien finally glanced up, threading his fork through the last piece of food. "When it's settled," he said coolly, "you'll know. Until then, lay off the questions." Pepper pressed her lips together, more determined than ever to find out exactly what transcendent really meant, and whether she'd be the next in line. She hesitated, ready to speak, but when she noticed Damien Ambalaka standing at her side, she caught herself. Instead of blurting out her question, she decided to ask Tony in private. "This is taking forever," she complained, nodding at the sparse tray in front of them. "I'll save you some and go grab a bite over there." Damien lifted his eyes, exchanged a glance with Tony, and then stood. He could feel it. The seed of desire had been planted, and now all he needed was time for it to grow. Humans are born to crave evolution, to live longer, to wield greater power. And when that evolution carries no mortal risk, almost no one turns it down, unless they're perfectly content with mediocrity. Would Tony Stark ever be satisfied with status quo? Of course not. No matter how his personality shifted, the scientist's relentless drive remained. If he hadn't been consumed by that obsession, he never would have defied his peers to build Ultron, a terrifying, self-aware weapon. And with the Void's power fueling his brilliance, Damien had no doubt Tony would soon unleash even more awe-inspiring and possibly more dangerous technology. Tony waved a hand toward the table. "Really, it's fine. Just dig in." Damien shook his head. "We don't have much of an appetite," he said lightly. Tony watched him step toward the long buffet table, then hesitated. He'd expected Damien to dive into the food like a starving man, but instead Damien moved with quiet grace, selecting a few items with deliberate care. Tony's mind drifted as he observed him, his calm composure, the easy confidence. This young man, Damien Ambalaka, possessed uncanny abilities, and Tony had been wrestling ever since with the possibility of sharing that power. If he accepted Damien's offer, he could gain the same supernatural strength, the same potentially centuries-long life. The price? An insatiable appetite. Food would become an endless craving. But Tony had the means to satisfy it. He could eat whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, as long as he didn't cross the line into something monstrous. Still, the hardest obstacle wasn't dietary. It was Tony's public persona. He was Tony Stark, industrialist, celebrity genius. If overnight he reverted to the appearance of a 17-year-old boy, the tabloids would smell something off. People would whisper, alien, monster, or worse. Rejecting the offer would look more believable, safer. Accepting it would shatter everything. He looked over at Damien, who was now balancing a plate of sushi, roast beef, and a small glass of red wine. Damien caught his gaze, gave him a small, knowing smile, but he didn't prod. He simply waited, giving Tony all the time he needed. Tony sighed. He still had decisions to make, but for the moment, he'd selfishly enjoy the party, the food, and the company before fate forced his hand. Chapter 35. The uncontrollable demon Pepper wanted to lean in and quietly ask Tony what was on his mind, but the tense crease between his brows told her he was deep in thought. Reluctantly, she held her tongue. She sensed that something had shifted after Tony's brief, secretive exchange with Coulson and Damien Ambalaka. Ever since she'd looked after Tony for the past 10 years, anticipating his needs, handling his errands, he'd always confided in her. She thought she knew every nuance of his mood, every shift in his plans. Yet now he was suddenly withholding, and his behavior felt different. Their conversation with Damien had been no more than a few clipped sentences, yet Pepper felt as if the world had tilted on its axis. Tony and Damien shared a look when they spoke, one that made it clear they both understood something she didn't. The realization left her more unsettled than confused. After a decade of perfect rapport, Tony's thoughts were a complete mystery to her. She couldn't guess what he was plotting or worrying about, and the distance between them felt wider than ever. The sudden thrum of helicopter rotors reached them through the windows. Pepper froze, instantly recognizing the sound. Coulson had just landed. And she knew exactly what Tony would say. No visitors, no interruptions. "I'm fine, really," she told him. "You two go ahead without me." She rose and stood there, watching Tony with hopeful eyes, silently pleading for him to relent, just this once. Even if it meant serving coffee downstairs, she didn't want to be shut away. But Tony merely shook his head. "Go rest in your room. I'll handle this." "We have things to discuss," she pressed. "There'll be too much noise, so don't come down. Don't even peek." Pepper squared her shoulders. "I'm only coming down when you call me." Tony sighed, as if reluctantly remembering how to be polite. "Okay, fine." Disappointed but unsurprised, Pepper climbed the stairs. Tony turned back to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his mind racing too fast to dwell on her hurt expression. Behind them, Jarvis's calm voice announced, "Sir, Coulson's helicopter has just touched down. I should also mention there are several unfamiliar individuals with him." Jarvis glided into the corridor and pressed the button for the private elevator. A moment later, the doors slid open to reveal Agent Coulson, Nick Fury, Natasha Romanoff, and a handful of other S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives. Damien Stark, seated at a corner table, stood as soon as he caught sight of their formation. "Understood, sir," he said crisply. Jarvis bowed and led them through the lobby into a quiet, upscale restaurant. In the center of the dining room sat a massive crate, its surface marked with unfamiliar symbols. Nick Fury paused at the threshold, and his gaze fell on Damien. He offered a wry smile. "Damien Stark, son of Howard." Damien's posture remained unflinching. Fury continued, "I never expected you'd have your father's personal effects stashed away, and I certainly didn't think you'd bring them out into the open." He glanced at Natasha, then turned back to Damien. "So you understand what my father's legacy really means, don't you?" At last, they stood face to face. Damien met Fury's cold stare with steady calm. "I have a fair idea," he replied. Silence settled over the table as the two heirs of different worlds squared off, each weighing the other's next move. Damien stepped into the stark, fluorescent-lit briefing room just as Nick Fury walked in, this time face-to-face rather than via video link. Fury's one good eye tracked him coolly. "Of course you'd be interested," Tony Stark said, swiveling in his chair to face them both. "Your father was a genius, pure and simple. And over the years, his inventions became classified military assets," Fury added. "They've been in S.H.I.E.L.D. custody ever since." Tony nodded. "I meant to find the right moment to hand them back to you. I wanted us to sit down, go through the designs together, see what you could uncover." Fury offered Damien a wry half-smile. "I didn't expect you to, beat me to the punch. As they say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." With that, Fury stopped hiding behind screens and spoke directly. "Cut the pleasantries. Where are my father's prototypes?" Tony's expression shifted. He studied Fury for a moment before replying. "Fine, you can have them, but only if you agree to study them under S.H.I.E.L.D. supervision." Fury inclined his head. "Funny, you didn't sound this reasonable a minute ago." Tony raised an eyebrow. "Why am I suddenly the bad guy? You think I'll hand over your dad's work if you storm out?" Damien watched the two legends square off, eager to see which one would blink first. Nick Fury glanced at Tony Stark, his expression as steely as ever. "Tony, you know I don't enjoy this any more than you do, but you have to appreciate our position. We can't afford another leak." Murmurs of irritation rippled through the room. Tony folded his arms. Across from them, Damien Ambalaka sat at the table, picking at a plate of food. 5 paces away, Natasha Romanoff watched him with cool, unreadable eyes. Fury ignored the side comments and spoke directly to Damien. Mr. Ambalaka, S.H.I.E.L.D. isn't accusing you of anything, yet. But your work, your resources, could pose a serious security risk if they fell into the wrong hands. That's why we've put you under surveillance. Why Agent Romanoff is here. Damien raised an eyebrow. So your solution is to tail me everywhere and post a sniper behind my couch. Not a sniper, Fury corrected. A guardian. And we need your cooperation. We've drafted an agreement. Any substantial transfer of your assets, equipment, data cores, whatever, will require S.H.I.E.L.D. clearance. In return, you're free to go whenever you like. No detention, no charges, just mutual assurance. Damien set down his fork and met Fury's gaze evenly. And if I refuse? Fury's jaw tightened. Then we'll review our options. He let that hang in the air. After a beat, he drew a tablet toward him. Sign here, and we're done. We trust you. You trust us. That's all there is to it. Damien leaned back, studying the tablet and the promise it carried. Natasha remained motionless, her presence a quiet reminder of what was at stake. Finally, Damien reached out, picked up the stylus, and wrote his name. Damien leaned back in his chair, surveying Natasha across the table. The dim light caught the edge of his smile as he spoke quietly. So from now on, I'll be watching your money, then you can finally walk away? Natasha's eyes flashed. And should I be grateful for your generosity? He chuckled. Damien Ambalax, you navigate the dark web like it's second nature, and you have the funds to cripple us if you choose. Better that we come to an understanding, no stepping on each other's toes. Natasha's jaw tightened. What if I refuse? Damien's gaze didn't waver. I hope you won't make this difficult, but if you do, we have other ways to persuade you. At that, Natasha slid a pistol from her coat. She leveled it at him, her voice low and controlled. So when words fail, you plan to use force? Damien's grin died. His expression went stone cold. In an instant, the black-suited agents at the edges of the room tensed, only to find Damien's seat empty. Before anyone could react, he materialized behind Natasha. His left hand shot out, clamping around her throat, hoisting her off the ground. With his right, he seized her wrist and twisted hard. A sharp crack echoed through the room as her arm went limp and the pistol clattered to the floor. Damien pressed her tighter against the chair's high back, his voice dangerously calm. Now, tell me, what's your price for cooperation? A strangled scream cut through the dining hall. Natasha convulsed, her body racked with agony as cold sweat beaded on her forehead. In an instant, every agent except Coulson drew their weapons and leveled them at Damien. But before anyone could pull a trigger, a sudden clicking echoed off the walls. One by one, their pistols disintegrated into dust, scattering across the floor. Simultaneously, the agents cried out in pain as the bones in their hands seemed to twist and fracture. Guns gone, their hands grotesquely mangled. Nick Fury and the injured agents staggered, moaning in disbelief and horror. Coulson held up his unarmed hands. Damien Ambalaka, he called, voice steadier than he felt. Please stop. Damien shook his head, unimpressed. You tried words first, he said quietly. When that failed, you tried force. His lips curled in a faint, cruel smile. And now you think words will work again? Without pausing, he flicked his wrist. Natasha's limp form shot across the room like a rag doll, slamming into the far wall with a bone-shattering crack. Dust and plaster showered down as she crumpled to the floor. Natasha gasped, blood flooding her mouth. She lay unmoving for a moment, then managed a pained groan. Every shattered bone felt like 1,000 needles, and she could barely draw breath. Ugh, she whimpered, eyes fluttering open to reveal nothing but helpless pain. Is it painful? Damien asked, his tone flat. Natasha glared up at him, pain twisting her features. The first time you tested me, you even shot me, to see if I'd display some freak strength. And now you want to drag me into your Avengers? He shook his head, unconcerned. Don't be ridiculous. If I really had that kind of power, I could have killed you for firing at me. Damien closed the 10-meter gap in 2 long strides and stood over her, looking down at her contorted face with the detachment one might reserve for a bothersome insect. In that moment, he seemed like a lawless, remorseless demon, and everyone watching felt a cold dread seep into their bones. Tony Stark, watching from the sidelines, understood too well just how terrifying Damien was. Damien had subjected Tony to a similar test himself, casually boosting his own physical capabilities and then dismissing it as a minor experiment. Seeing it for himself now, Stark realized humanity's ordinary weapons were nothing against Damien. Even clad in the most advanced armor, Tony knew he'd be no more than a plaything in Damien's hands. Damien leaned back against the crumbling wall, one boot propped casually on the fallen form of Agent Romanoff. Her blood trickled beneath him, pooling in the dirt, but he seemed unnervingly calm. Nick Fury winced, every breath a fresh stab of agony. He lifted his uninjured left hand in a weak salute. "Damien," he rasped, "if you have something to say, speak now." Damien's eyes glittered in the gloom. "I was just thinking," he said softly, "that Blue Star might run into aliens soon." He paused, letting the words hang between them. "And that you've put too much faith in Natasha Romanoff, someone you call a genetically enhanced veteran with exceptional endurance." Fury's face contorted. "She's one of our best," he hissed. "A loss like her would hurt Blue Star." "Would it, though?" Damien shrugged. "If she dies, that's merely one more body to add to the count. You say her death is a blow to your precious planet, but what does that mean for me?" Fury clenched his teeth. His gaze darted between Damien's indifferent profile and the bleeding agent on the ground. He opened his mouth to protest, then faltered. Damien settled more comfortably against the wall and studied Fury coolly. "I told you before," he said, "I only care about what I can't offend. You made me unhappy, you let me scold you a few times, and that was enough to even the score. As long as you leave me alone, I won't bother you. But now your arrogance, your need to bully me with your rank and power, well, that's something I can't just ignore." Silence fell. Fury's hand dropped to his side. Damien turned his head, offering the barest of smirks. In the stillness, the dying agent's shallow breaths echoed like a metronome, and neither of the men looked away. Chapter 7. A Lesson in Pain. Nick Fury stood in the dimly lit conference room of the S-Shield safe house, arms folded across his chest. Across the table sat Damien Ambalaka, the young Asian tycoon whose fortune and influence rivaled entire governments. Fury had come here confident that a neatly drafted contract would bind Damien to their cause and secure a fragile peace. He was about to discover how badly he'd miscalculated. Damien's expression never wavered. He met Fury's glare with cold, unblinking eyes. "I suggest you abandon these schemes," Damien said, his voice deceptively calm, "because if you don't, I'll break every bone in your body, one by one, so you'll finally understand what real pain feels like." At that moment, Natasha Romanoff, seated quietly beside Fury, halted her hand in midair. Her usual composure cracked, and a flicker of shock passed through her dark eyes. In all her years as the Black Widow, she had faced monsters, dictators, even gods, but Damien Ambalaka was something different. He exuded a ruthless confidence that bordered on inhuman. Fury's jaw tightened. He realized that no amount of diplomatic posturing or moral appeals would contain this man. Damien Ambalaka was more than a billionaire with resources. He was a force unto himself, and he had just made it clear that he answered to no one. Silence settled over the room as everyone absorbed the weight of Damien's warning. In that stillness, it became brutally clear. This was no longer a negotiation. It was a prelude to war. Chapter 36. No next time. "Mr. Damien Ambalaka, it's entirely my fault that I didn't make it clear to my colleagues how strongly you distrust S-Shield," Coulson said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. He winced at his own slip into formality. Earlier, when he'd spoken with Damien, the man had made his disdain for the organization abundantly clear, and his lack of interest in joining the Avengers. At the time, Coulson had been too annoyed to pass the message along to headquarters. Now, realizing his mistake, he regretted not warning Nick Fury in advance. Fury's anger would have been less intense, and they might not be standing here in this mess. "You were far too clever not to shoot me just now," Damien replied coolly, his gaze drifting to the pistol holstered at Coulson's side. "But don't mistake cleverness for leverage. You still don't have the standing to haggle with me." Coulson's face went pale. He'd been so focused on damage control that he'd forgotten one crucial fact. Damien was dangerous, and unafraid to use force. Damien watched him calmly, the faintest hint of a smirk on his lips. "Let me be clear," he continued. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to finish what I came for, on my terms. Silence stretched between them as Coulson lowered his hands. He knew the only path forward was to accept Damien's terms or risk provoking him. Fury's scolding would have to wait. Right now, they had a far more immediate and perilous situation on their hands. Damien stood motionless, his gaze cold as steel. Coulson dropped to one knee before him, voice trembling with desperation. I understand, Coulson began, swallowing hard. Please, grant us another chance. Agent Natasha is gravely wounded and on the brink of death. She's already paid dearly for her mistake. I swear we will never cross you again. I stake my life on it. He shook his head emphatically, as if willing his words to ring truer with each motion. Damien Ambalaka, I beg you, don't let anyone else die because of me. Tony Stark stepped forward, arms folded, his tone calm but firm. Coulson, I'm not here to demand your head, but mark my words. The next time someone from S.H.I.E.L.D. tries to make a move against me, you bring me their head. Otherwise, you know the consequences. Damien's eyes flicked to Tony, then settled back on Coulson. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, his voice was low and steady. Very well. Coulson felt the weight of the threat in Damien's single word, the unspoken promise of violence, and his heart pounded in his chest. He bowed his head, trembling. Thank you, sir. Damien stood, back straight and eyes blazing, as the sterile light of the command center fell across his features. The tension in the room felt almost tangible. I'm giving you one chance, he said, voice cold and unyielding. Nick Fury's hand hovered near his holster. He'd been planning to call in Carol Danvers the moment he had a clear shot at subduing this demon, as his advisors privately dubbed Damien Ambalaka. Earth's entire military might had shown itself futile against Damien's powers, and Fury had been counting on Captain Marvel to tip the scales. But Damien leveled him with an unblinking stare. Don't count on Captain Marvel coming to save you. That woman won't help you, and she certainly won't help me. At the mention of Carol's name, Fury's carefully laid plans unraveled. He'd assumed he could always fall back on her. Now, every contingency evaporated. He forced a tight smile, voice measured. Thank you for your generosity, Mr. Ambalaka. Phil Coulson stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on Fury's shoulder. Relief and awe mingled on his face. Thank you, Mr. Ambalaka, he echoed, quieter but no less sincere. Silence settled over the command center as Damien simply watched them. The power dynamics irrevocably shifted, and Earth's fate suddenly felt more uncertain than ever. Tony Stark watched Coulson's maneuver with a growing sense of admiration. The agent had real nerve. He just stepped forward and confronted Damien Ambalaka head-on in the middle of this standoff. Coulson's voice stayed level as he warned, You've got just one chance. Do whatever it takes to be ready next time. Damien's gaze drifted to Natasha, her eyes wide, fear shimmering across her face, then snapped back to Coulson. I understand, he said quietly. I won't forget. Even if I somehow manage to, I'll remember this moment. Coulson gave a firm nod. He'd actually planned to come alone today, solely to recover the relics Howard Stark had left behind. Although Damien had threatened them, Coulson had already made it clear through careful negotiation that, however much Damien disliked the team, he lacked the means to stand against them directly. Superpowers or not, if Ambalaka really wanted to hire mercenaries off the dark web, he could have done so in secret. No big announcement necessary. By making those threats on camera, Damien had shown he was serious, offering a blunt, unmistakable warning rather than a hidden one. Chapter X, Uninvited Visitors. Nick Fury's patience had finally snapped. Damien Ambalaka, a self-made Asian billionaire with no superhuman abilities, had grown far too arrogant. Fury and his S.H.I.E.L.D. agents had come to Stark Industries for a simple warning: stop meddling in global matters or face the consequences. Instead, their well-intentioned visit nearly turned into a massacre. The lab door burst open, and Fury strode in flanked by Natasha Romanoff and Agent Coulson. Cables sparked overhead, Stark's prototype arc reactor humming in the background. Damien sat at a polished steel table, cutting through a juicy steak as if nothing were amiss. Nick Fury leveled a hard stare. We're willing to leave you alone. Just back off S.H.I.E.L.D. operations. Damien paused mid-slice, then met Fury's gaze with icy calm. I'm not interested in deals. He took a deliberate bite. You misunderstand my hospitality. Coulson opened his mouth, then closed it again. Natasha's eyes darted between Fury and Damien, tension coiling in the air. Damien laid down his fork. Get out! No one dared argue. Fury signaled the retreat. Coulson dashed over to pull Natasha into a quick, anxious hug. The agents filed out in stunned silence, none daring to peek at Stark's confidential research. Left alone, Damien reclined in his chair and gestured at the table. Carry on eating. Tony, you can finish your work. The earlier frost in his expression melted away. He cleaned his mouth with a napkin, then leaned forward. By the way, you mentioned Captain Marvel. Is she really that powerful? Tony Stark glanced up from his datapad, a wry grin spreading under his goatee. Yeah, she's one of the strongest people on the planet. Damien nodded, satisfied, and returned to his meal. Whatever sparks had nearly ignited with S. Healed were now extinguished, at least for today, and the two geniuses, one armored and one unpowered, turned their attention back to Tony's groundbreaking research. Stronger than you? Tony Stark's eyebrow shot up the moment Damien admitted it. I hate to say it, but she's got me beat now. Damien tapped his comm unit. Jarvis, are they clear of the perimeter? A moment later, Jarvis's holographic interface shimmered to life in front of them. Yes, sir. Natasha's condition forced them to withdraw immediately. The extraction chopper is airborne. Outside, the distant thrum of rotor blades confirmed the AI's report. Tony let out a low whistle of relief. You really rattled them back there, Damien. Damien allowed himself a small grin, just returning the favor. But don't fool yourself. Captain Marvel's strength isn't a joke. Tony leaned in, lowering his voice. Jarvis, make sure Fury can't pick up any of this. Jarvis's projection flickered. Understood, sir. Communications are secure. Damien watched Tony's nervous glance at the holoscreen and shook his head. Look, Carol's powerful. Nobody's denying that. But her talent is pretty straightforward. Raw energy, brute force. If I slip into the void, she'll never predict where I'm headed. So am I cautious? Sure. Afraid? Not I. And the slightest. Tony relaxed against the console, rubbing his temples. Good to know, because if she really wanted me out of the picture, well, I don't like being outclassed. Damien patted him on the shoulder. You'll manage. Just keep your suit charged, and Jarvis on standby. Jarvis's calm voice cut through the tension. All systems are operational, sir. Shall I prepare a safe corridor for your departure? Damien nodded. Do it. Let's get out of here before anyone else shows up. With that, the two engineers turned reluctant allies, turned back to the hologram, plotting their next move under the cover of night and beyond the reach of even the mightiest heroes. Compared to Captain Marvel, powerful as she is, but limited to a single ability, Odin and the Ancient One posed a far greater threat. Odin, the Allfather of the Asgardians, watches over all 9 realms and can turn his gaze on Earth at any moment. If he were ever provoked, he would unleash a level of power Damien wasn't ready to face. And the Ancient One, keeper of time and master of arcane forces, could peer into both past and future and bend reality in unsettling ways. Until Damien's own strength reached a certain threshold, taking on either of them would be courting disaster. I don't fully understand all the details, Tony Stark admitted with a relieved sigh, but I'm glad you have enough confidence in yourself to handle whatever comes next. Damien met Tony's encouraging smile in silence, sensing that Stark was genuinely on his side. Chapter 37, Tony's Request. Tony Stark glanced across the table at Damien Ambalaka, who sat silently, methodically picking at his meal. After a moment, Tony cleared his throat. Come on, Damien, just how tough are you? Could one of those mushroom bombs even scratch you? Damien paused, then shrugged, setting down his fork. Human weapons? They can't touch me. Tony raised an eyebrow. Not even those exploding mushroom eggs? The blast, the radiation. Surely that does something. Damien leaned back in his chair, folding his arms casually. I haven't been idle these last few months. I'm averaging 6 evolutions a month, 283 total now. My void skin has advanced 64 times. I've been to the deepest trench on Blue Star. The pressure down there used to be lethal. Now I swim through it like it's nothing. Stark frowned. But a direct hit from a mushroom bomb, an explosion that size, would still hurt, wouldn't it? Maybe at first, Damien admitted. The initial shockwave could injure me if I took it head on. But here's the thing. If I avoid the peak of the blast and its immediate fallout, the residual radiation basically forces another evolution. Give me an hour or two in that environment, and I'll be immune to it. After that, I can move freely through the irradiated zone. So you survive long enough to evolve past it, Tony said slowly. Then you're unstoppable. Damien offered a faint smile. That's the nature of the void. It's not just monsters or crushing pressure you have to fear, it's how quickly it reshapes you. Once you adapt, you might as well be invincible. Tony leaned back, nodding to himself. He'd encountered extraordinary powers before, but Damien's accelerating evolution was on another level. He'd have to keep this one under close watch and keep those mushroom bombs in mind. Damien braced himself against the cavern's jagged wall, every breath a razor in his lungs. Even wounded and stranded in this unforgiving void, he knew something remarkable would happen so long as he survived. He would adapt. In time, his body would evolve to thrive in any hostile environment. Tony Stark's brow shot up. Are you saying that, given enough time, you could reach my level of power? Damien met Tony's curious gaze and nodded. At first, it seems impossible, but the void's biology is all about adaptation. Hurt me enough times, and I'll develop resistance. Starve me, freeze me, expose me to radiation. Eventually, I'll evolve defenses. It just takes time. Tony paced the length of the chamber, clearly intrigued. So you'd gain an almost eternal lifespan and strength no one else can match. Damien folded his arms. Exactly. The void creatures I command are more than weapons, they're templates for evolution. Once you bond with one, you inherit its adaptive traits. Every creature in the void has the potential to grow stronger. Differences between them are only in how quickly they evolve and how extreme their survival thresholds are. Stark stopped by a console, tapping a few commands. Unmatched power sounds great, on paper. But what if a god showed up? What happens then? Damien tilted his head thoughtfully. Even gods have limits. If they can be wounded, I can adapt. Given enough conflicts, even a deity's strength becomes just another challenge to overcome. Tony exhaled, half in wonder, half in admiration. You've really done your homework, haven't you? All right, Damien, I want to see this in action. Let's put theory to the test. As Tony's challenge echoed through the void-lit chamber, Damien felt the stirrings of new power deep within him. The trial was only just beginning. Think of gods as beings, perhaps extraterrestrials, with lifespans so vast and powers so immense that they dwarf anything humanity can comprehend, the scholar explained. Their abilities exceed our understanding, and since human lives rarely stretch beyond 100 years, we perceive anything they do as divine miracles. Damien absorbed the words in silence. Finally, he murmured, living only a century, it feels unbearably Hort. Tony Stark caught the subtle sadness in Damien's voice. He paused, ran a hand through his hair, and offered a wry, bittersweet smile. Damien sat quietly as the alien lecturer's soft, echoing voice filled the chamber. Compared to our species, humans live only a fleeting century, the alien began. Yet even within that brief span, humanity has produced remarkable talents. From Galileo to Curie, from Shakespeare to Turing, each achieved feats in youth that resonate through time. But age is inexorable. The body weakens, the mind clouds, and there simply isn't the energy to explore the world's remaining mysteries. Their brilliance, however vivid, fades all too quickly in the grand tapestry of history. The alien paused, its luminescent eyes fixed on a spinning hologram of Earth's great minds. Now imagine if every genius from every era could live far longer, united across centuries. Humanity's scientific and technological civilization would advance beyond anything you know. Damien's eyes flickered with interest. Lifespan was indeed humanity's greatest hurdle. He understood all too well the frustration of watching time slip away. How many dreams remained untested? How many frontiers unanswered? He longed for more years, to refine his ideas, to witness the future he had envisioned, to stand before wonders no one had yet dared to imagine. And unlike ordinary mortals, Damien possessed an extended lifespan. He could look ahead, see the unfolding chapters of tomorrow, and perhaps, just perhaps, help write them. He straightened his posture and spoke, his voice steady and clear. Time is our most precious resource. Lengthen it, and we unlock possibilities beyond our wildest dreams. Damien refused to reject what made him unique, even if others labeled him an alien. He understood human nature far better than most. People love to condemn what they secretly envy. Those who call a long life a curse simply lack the power to shape their fate with the extra years they've been given. In truth, An extended lifespan opens the door to countless wonders. Tony Stark felt a chill when Damien Ambalaka spoke. The man's power lay beyond anything Stark had ever encountered, and his perspective on the world was forged by forces Stark could barely imagine. Not long before, Nick Fury had threatened Damien, and though Stark had bristled at the insult, he'd wisely held his tongue. Fury was the embodiment of the American military, after all, and challenging him openly would have been madness. Damien, however, answered Fury's aggression with unrestrained force. A single strike from him shattered the ground beneath their feet. Had he chosen to unleash his full might, every S-Shield agent in the room would have been wiped out. Only Damien's own restraint spared them all. Watching that display, Stark finally realized the hard truth. No matter how many improvements he made to his iron armor, he could never match Damien's inhuman strength. Tony Stark hesitated for only a moment before speaking. Damien Ambalaka had just confided in him a revelation more valuable than any weapon. Those who ascend to Damien's level only grow more powerful with each passing moment. Since Damien had created him, it followed that Damien himself wielded that same relentless, ever-building strength, only far more terrifying in scale. Damien had even warned, almost in passing, that no matter how much Tony evolved, he would never catch up. Those words had stuck with him. Now, with countless others clamoring for the chance at extended life and ever greater power, Tony realized he could no longer afford to worry about pride or appearances. He squared his shoulders and met Damien's cool, unreadable gaze. "Damien Ambalaka," he began, his voice steady. "I understand that I have neither the power nor the standing to make demands." Damien raised a single brow, but Tony pressed on. "But I do have one request." A flicker of interest crossed Damien's features. Tony seized the moment, determination sparking in his eyes. "There's no need for arrogance," he said quietly but firmly. In that charged silence, the unspoken promise of what came next hung between them, heavier than any threat or plea. Damien leaned forward, eyes bright with resolve. "You have an exceptional mind, Tony. I know that a title doesn't make one powerful. True power comes from within. I want to ask you for something extraordinary, to grant me abilities like yours, greater strength, and a longer life." Tony Stark studied him for a moment, then shook his head with a wry smile. "Hold on. Why don't you talk this over with Pepper first?" Damien's brow furrowed. "Pepper? You haven't told her about this yet?" The corner of Tony's mouth twitched. "I wanted to have my own head screwed on straight before I dragged her into it." Damien nodded slowly, understanding, but still uneasy. "I see. Look, I know it sounds greedy, maybe even shameless, but there's one more thing I need to ask." He swallowed. "If you decide to grant me any enhancements at all, could you also use your process to extend Pepper's life? Even if my own powers end up less than perfect, I can't bear the thought of her lifespan being cut short." Tony went silent for a long moment, the lab lights dancing off his arc reactor as he weighed the request. Finally, he exhaled. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Damien met his gaze without flinching. "More than anything." Tony nodded once, decisively. "All right, let's see what we can do for both of you." Women long for eternal youth more passionately than men do. Tony understood that perfectly. If he could restore his own youthfulness and share the secret with Pepper, she'd almost certainly welcome it. The only question left was whether Damien Ambalaka would agree to his proposal. What do you think? Should Tony go ahead? Cast your votes. Chapter 38. The Greatness of the Void. Damien's eyes shone with understanding. He now realized why Tony Stark had offered him the chance to become physically younger and stronger. The moment to decide whether he truly aspired to this destiny was fast approaching. "Your only real worry," Tony said, "is that once you transform into a being like me, your identity will be so radically different that others will surely regard you as an alien." Damien nodded thoughtfully. He had anticipated this objection, but now that Tony had voiced it, he could address it head-on. "Yes," he admitted, "that was my concern, but I've given it careful thought, and I've made my choice. I want a longer life to harness my talents and explore mysteries I've yet to understand." "I believe countless people would dream of such an opportunity," Tony responded. "You're far from mediocre. Your ambitions are everything but ordinary." Damien let out a small, rueful laugh. "I was too short-sighted before to see that clearly, But now I understand. Tony held out his hand, his eyes steady. Since you've made up your mind, I can promise you this transformation. But first, allow me to introduce myself properly. He paused for dramatic effect, then continued. I hail from the void, and the power I wield springs from that same boundless nothingness. A confident smile spread across Damien's face as he absorbed the weight of Tony's words. Now there was no turning back. Tony Stark wasn't surprised to discover that Damien Umbaraka wasn't human. Damien's breadth of knowledge far exceeded anything the Blue Star's abilities could explain, and his mindset was equally alien. No code of ethics, no human framework could ever contain him. But when Damien casually mentioned the void, Tony's eyes narrowed. That god of death you spoke of, Tony said, voice low and sharp. He comes from the void too, doesn't he? Tony had first glimpsed the gateway to the new world because of death's existence, so he knew exactly what Damien meant. Damien gave a half shrug. The god of death is just a convenient persona I adopted. It lets me operate more freely. Damien's eyes gleamed as he studied Tony's reaction. If they truly shared an origin, Tony Stark would immediately pour resources into tracking down this death entity, and he'd almost certainly find him. Better to be upfront. No offense intended, Damien added smoothly. At those words, Tony felt his thoughts spiral. He remembered how arrogantly he dismissed Damien at first, and now, realizing the depths of Damien's power and reach, he broke out in a cold sweat. Damien pulled off his mask in one smooth motion, revealing sharp features framed by dark hair. Tony Stark's eyes went wide, his hands trembling so badly the glass in his grip rattled. You don't have to be afraid now that you know who I am, Damien said quietly. He stepped forward, calm and measured. Listen, I'm not one for formalities, but I have a code. I treat people the way they treat me. As long as you don't decide to become my enemy, I won't hurt you. Tony exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. He realized that Damien held no grudge over the earlier scuffle, or at least wasn't interested in playing petty vengeance. A shaky smile broke through the tension. So, you're not out to get me? He asked. Damien shook his head once. Think of me as kin to the god of death. Inevitable, yes, but not malicious for its own sake. He gave a half grin. And next time I drag you to see my iron suit up close, I promise I won't look like a clown. Tony chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. You'd better not. I can't handle another impromptu fashion show. Despite himself, he sounded amused, grateful that, for the moment, the worst was over. Damien paused mid-bite, spoon hovering over his bowl. I never expected you to be a clown, he said, but I also didn't realize how brilliant you really are. Tony Stark's grin widened. Brilliant? Coming from you, I'll take that as a compliment. Damien set the spoon down and leaned forward. You made this steel armor with nothing but your own genius. True, it still has its flaws, but if someone could replace the palladium core with another element, it would be an anachronistic marvel, something that grants its wearer extraordinary power and might change the course of humanity. Tony gestured casually, pretending to brush off the praise. I've always said, science is about pushing boundaries, but let's talk about you for a moment. Damien raised an eyebrow. Right. You said you're from the void. How do I become like you? For a heartbeat, Tony looked surprised by the question. Then he smirked, pride shining in his eyes. If you want to be like me, you have to believe in the void, and then you join us. Damien studied Tony's expression. The confidence there was almost contagious. He folded his arms across his chest. Believe in the void and join it? What exactly is the void? Is the void a place, an organization, or simply a manifestation of some cosmic will? Damien asked, brow furrowed in genuine curiosity. Tony Stark paused, caught off guard by the question. Before he could answer aloud, a calm, disembodied voice echoed in Damien's mind. It has come to our attention that a new being wishes to commune with the void. Please inform the host, let them understand what the void represents, and offer them the chance to transcend their mortal limitations. Tony met Damien's eyes and tried again. Think of the void as any one of these, or all of them at once. It can be a realm, a collective consciousness, even a distinct species or dimension. Damien folded his arms. So if I join the void, I stop being human? You could say that, Tony replied softly. Humans are bound by time. The void exists outside of that cycle. Damien let that sink in. It's hard to picture. Tony glanced around the quiet lab, his mind racing. I get it. Words only go so far. You need to see it for yourself. Once you've experienced the void, you can decide if you're ready to embrace it. A flicker of determination crossed Damien's features. Show me. How do we begin? Tony swallowed. He felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't another tech demo or off-the-shelf invention. Guiding Damien into the unknown void meant venturing where no human had gone. Yet, as he looked at his friend, he knew there was no turning back. He simply nodded. I'll figure it out. Let's get you ready. You'll know, Damien said with a confident smile, and then he tapped confirm on the system's prompt. The instant he did, Tony Stark's eyes glazed over, his awareness slipping away. In a heartbeat, he found himself drifting through the boundless expanse of space. Brilliant galaxies swirled around him, but one colossal, churning vortex drew his gaze. A titanic black hole fringed with iridescent colors so vivid they defied belief. Tony had only ever seen such spectacles on film. Suddenly, the very fabric of the cosmos began to shudder. Stars trembled, nebulas warped, and the void itself seemed to twist, as though reality were recoiling from some unimaginable force. Tony felt every fiber of his being freeze with primal fear, as if his cells had suddenly recognized that something terrible was about to break free. Then it happened. From the heart of the energy-blackened abyss, an enormous creature tore its way into existence. Towering and terrifying, it stood on 6 jointed limbs, its exoskeleton a deep, gleaming purple. Its head, shaped like a mantis's, swiveled with alien intelligence, mandibles clicking ominously in the void. The beast's glowing, multifaceted eyes fixed on Tony, radiating a hunger that sent pulses of dread through his very soul. Tony Stark, trapped in this cosmic nightmare, could only watch helplessly as the monster took its first deliberate steps forward, each one promising the end of all he knew. Tony Stark drifted alone in the void, his eyes fixed on a single fragment of an impossibly vast creature. It wasn't even the monster's entire form, just a sliver of it, yet its scale dwarfed every star in sight. Galaxies, planets, even the distant suns he'd fought beside now seemed larger than embers against its carapace. In that instant, Tony felt like nothing more than a mote of dust drifting through infinity. Then the fragment began to shift. Plates of chitin rolled back on themselves, glowing mandibles contracted and elongated, and a gargantuan, otherworldly limb folded inward. In moments, the formless mass resolved into a humanoid silhouette, suspended at an impossible distance. Yet, against all reason, Tony could make out every detail. A storm tore at his chest. The figure's broad shoulders, the casual way it held its head, he knew that stance. It was Damien Embalaka, the man he'd once called ally. But this Damien was unlike any version he had ever met. Here, the cosmic winds whipped around him as he stood among the stars, hands clasped behind his back, gazing out at the universe with a calm yet unshakable solitude. Tony's mind raced, but there was no time to reflect. All around the mantis-like behemoth, other colossal entities drifted through the emptiness. One in particular caught his eye, a towering presence swathed in a white cloak that billowed like a living nebula, its face hidden behind a flawless golden mask. It moved with deliberate grace, descending into the void as if stepping off a cliff, and then, without a sound or ripple, it simply vanished into nothingness. For a heartbeat, the silence of space pressed in on Tony. Then he realized the universe was far larger and far stranger than he had ever imagined. And at its heart stood Damien, silent and inscrutable, watching it all. Damien drifted into the cosmic void, his consciousness engulfed by sights beyond imagination. Before him loomed a gargantuan monstrosity, its body bristling with jagged spines, vast as a galaxy and capable of swallowing a star in a single gulp. Nearby, what first appeared to be an enormous purple star revealed itself as a single, unblinking eye, its iris swirling with ageless secrets as it watched over the dark expanse. All around, unspeakable creatures tunneled endlessly into the void, their inhuman howls rippling through space and rattling the foundations of reality. Above the tumult stood a towering humanoid figure clad in gleaming violet armor, an ancient sentinel gazing down the endless river of time itself. Each vision surpassed anything Damien had ever known. In the end, every monstrous form seemed to converge into one impossible silhouette, and he suddenly felt the full weight of his own insignificance before the infinite grandeur of the void. Yet within that awe lay a whisper of purpose, an echo of the Void's inscrutable will. Please recommend, read, and invest. Chapter 39. Welcome to the Void. Damien watched in stunned silence as Tony Stark's form shimmered beneath a swirling cloak of violet energy. The purple tendrils of the Void power wound around him, rewriting the very fabric of his life force. A clear, mechanical voice echoed in Damien's mind. The host has persuaded creature Tony Stark. This being qualifies as higher destiny and awards 100,000 Void energy. With each subsequent evolution of Tony Stark, the host's Void energy gain will increase. First creature successfully bound to the Void. Second hero template is now available. Host, please choose the moment to make your selection. A surge of triumph lit Damien's chest. By claiming these hero templates, he could unlock vast new reserves of strength, and each template promised a different path to power. Yet he forced himself to remain patient. This was no time for impulse. First, he had to gauge exactly what each template offered before committing. Half a universe away, Kamal Taj, known among her order as Ancient Yai, peered through the scrying stones at the cosmos's future path. In centuries past, her sight had spanned time like a clear river, but for the last 6 months, an impenetrable shadow had crept over her visions. No matter how hard she probed, the destiny of the Void and of all existence lay swallowed in darkness. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her viewing basin. Whatever force now cloaked the future posed a threat not only to worlds, but to the fragile balance of reality itself. With a heavy heart, she prepared to take measures ancient even she had long feared. And so the first gambit had been played. Tony Stark, bound to the Void. Now the question remained, how far was Damien willing to go for power, and would the cost prove too great for the universe to bear? Chapter 7. Long ago, in the hidden sanctum of Kamartaj, the Ancient One peered into the farthest reaches of the astral plane, and what she saw terrified her. A darkness, more vast than any galaxy, coalesced into a single, swirling star of pure void, blotting out every spark of light across space and time. Not even Dormammu's malevolent power could produce such a phenomenon. It vied with reality itself, erasing her spells and slipping beyond the edge of her sight. This was no mere disturbance. It was an omen of a force too great to measure, threatening to consume the universe. The Ancient One summoned every shred of her strength to halt it, but the Void's hunger was relentless. In a soft, urgent whisper, her voice carried on the currents of magic, she spoke her last hope into the ether. Stephen Strange, my disciple, my successor, I pray you will find a way to end this darkness. And then time moved on, as time does. When Tony Stark finally came back to consciousness, he was dimly aware of a sterile, unfamiliar ceiling far above him. A rhythmic beeping somewhere to his right sharpened his senses. He tried to sit up and nearly tumbled off the table. A firm hand steadied him. "Easy, Tony," said Damien, leaning over with a mixture of relief and concern. Damien's dark eyes were steady, his posture tense. "You gave us quite a scare." Tony let out a dry chuckle as he rubbed his temples. "I was never a fan of the straitjacket dream sequence." He studied Damien's alert face. "What happened?" Damien glanced toward the monitors, then back to Tony. "You collapsed. Your arc reactor overloaded. We barely stabilized you in time. We need you at full strength." He paused, as if weighing his next words. "But there's something else you should know. Something you've probably never encountered before." "Enlighten me," Tony muttered, bracing himself. "Do you understand what the Void is?" Tony frowned, gathering his thoughts. "I don't claim to know its every wrinkle," he began slowly, "but I know it's not just empty space. It's a cosmic abyss, a force that devours matter, energy, maybe even time itself." He met Damien's gaze. "If this Void is growing, well, I can't let it win." Damien nodded. "Then let's figure out how to stop it. Together. Welcome to the Void." Damien smiled as he heard the words and reached out his hand. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity." Tony Stark hesitated for only a moment before clasping Damien's hand in return. He stared at the man who'd just demonstrated the true power of the Void, monstrous forms summoned from another realm, and felt nothing but awe and gratitude. Damien had explained that the Void was more than a place. It was a people, a dimension, and, as Tony now realized, a living will. Damien himself embodied that force. Tony had poured every ounce of ingenuity into perfecting his armor, yet even his best work seemed insignificant in comparison to Damien's presence. He knew in his bones that he could never stand against this being, future tyrant or benevolent ruler. It mattered little. To align with Damien was to make the wisest choice of his life. To become his enemy was unthinkable. As Tony contemplated the path ahead under Damien's banner, he felt both humbled and resolute. The Void's power was nowhere near its limit, and neither, it seemed, was Damien's ambition. But for now, Tony was content to be an ally. He couldn't yet imagine what it would mean to oppose this nascent force. And frankly, he didn't want to. Damien finally understood why his predecessor, Damien Ambalaka, had always claimed no one could match his own stature. It's just a side job. He'd shrugged off their aspirations. Now that Damien had joined the Void, Tony Stark stepped forward to explain its true nature. The essence of the Void is survival, evolution, and adaptation, Tony began. You now possess the ability to evolve by devouring living creatures and matter. As long as you keep feeding and transforming, your power will surpass anything you can imagine. Right now, you're still weak, but give it time. Your mindset will change as your strength grows. Damien's eyes widened. Hold on, didn't you say that feeding was the price? He asked, stunned at the horrifying cost of true evolution. That is indeed the price, Master Ambalaka said gravely, because you won't be consuming just ordinary food, you'll be swallowing living creatures. And by devouring more powerful beings, you'll evolve faster and grow stronger. So remember this, don't let your hunger turn you into a mindless monster whose only drive is to eat and evolve. If you lose control and wreak havoc, I will kill you myself. I pray it never comes to that. Damien bowed his head and met Ambalaka's gaze. Understood, I'll be careful. No sooner had the words left his lips than a fierce hunger roared up inside him. Not a weakness, but a raw, instinctive craving. His eyes flicked to the array of dishes laid out before him. Concentrating, he noticed that each plate shimmered with its own subtle aura, colored and pulsing with energy. The entire room seemed to shift in perception. He turned back to Master Ambalaka. The older man's expression was calm. There was no telltale glow around him, no hint of the power now dancing around every morsel on the table. It was as though Ambalaka alone remained invisible to the hidden forces at play. Damien couldn't tell whether it was the sheer power gap or his own skill at concealing his presence, but Tony Stark didn't hesitate. As soon as the dishes appeared, Tony picked up his fork and dug in. Normally, these meals were only tasty and filling, but now, with every bite, he felt a comforting warmth spreading through his body. In under 2 minutes, Tony had cleared more than a dozen plates, far more than he'd ever managed before. And with each dish, his body began to change. His brown hair deepened to a richer shade, and his features grew smoother, almost boyish in their youthfulness. Damien watched in fascination as the transformation unfolded. Then, almost reflexively, he called out, "System! What direction is Tony Stark's evolution taking?" A moment later, the holographic display flickered to life with the system's reply. Creatures entering the Void evolve differently from their hosts. They do not follow a standard hero template. Damien folded his arms, considering that. So at first, their evolution is limited to enhanced physical capabilities, but their ultimate form is unpredictable. Rarely did the system offer more than bare facts. This time, however, it had responded in full. Damien's curiosity only deepened as he watched Tony's glow intensify, wondering just how far this new evolution would carry him. Damien leaned back, considering the implications. So they really do have to evolve and develop their own abilities before they can become truly powerful? The system offered no reply. Damien reflected on what he'd learned about hero templates and their origins, and at last grasped the principle at work. A hero granted a template arrives with built-in powers and a clearly defined evolutionary path. Tony Stark, by contrast, had no such shortcut. He would have to rely entirely on his own ingenuity and trial and error. Yet that wasn't necessarily a disadvantage. As long as Stark resisted the corrupting lure of unchecked ambition and kept his mind sharp, his genius intellect, extended lifespan, and indomitable body would allow him to master ever more astonishing abilities in time. Without a hero template, the road to true power is longer and steeper, but the chance to delve into the Void, unlock staggering evolutionary potential, and live far beyond a normal human span is reward enough. Chapter 40. Reasons to Make Money. Tony Stark kept shoveling food onto his plate, relishing the surge of energy that washed over him with every bite. The feeling was downright intoxicating, until he looked up and realized the banquet tables were completely cleared. He stared at the now empty platters. I could have sworn I prepared enough for at least 100 guests. Where did it all go? Damien Ambalaka, the evening's host, gave him an amused look. What do you think I've been doing? Tony patted his still flat stomach. Jarvis, load up more food, enough for 400 people this time. Of course, sir, the AI replied. This banquet is being held in honor of Damien Ambalaka. Tony smirked, unbothered by Damien's reminder about the perks of devouring creatures, namely, their accelerated evolution. He preferred to take his time. After all, his lifespan stretched far beyond a mere 100 years. Thanks, Jarvis. I've got all the time in the world to get stronger. No need to rush evolution. I'll pursue my interests at my own pace and let my talents shine. As you wish, sir. I'll begin preparations immediately. Tony leaned back in his chair, already eager for the next wave of dishes. If you were going to feast like a titan, you might as well do it properly. It would be hard to find a chef willing to take on so much cooking on New Year's Day, let alone one who could handle an entire banquet at once. But with the right price tag, you can always find help. Damien sat across from Tony Stark, who regarded him thoughtfully. Damien Ambalaka, Tony said, leaning back. You asked about my own evolution process. The truth is, I can't really be your reference point. Our paths are fundamentally different. You may not see it now, but you will soon. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. You've got a long life ahead, but it's up to you which abilities you'll master and how far you'll push your power. Damien nodded slowly. The promise of a grand banquet on Tony's tab had given him no rush to leave. He settled deeper into the sofa and said, I understand. I'm not asking you to be my benchmark. I just want some insight. Has anyone else tapped into the void besides me? If I could connect with them, maybe it would speed up my progress. As he spoke, Tony rose and crossed the room. He didn't realize how heavily he was charging the air with his energy until he sat down beside Damien, and a faint hum of power rippled through the couch cushions. Damien tensed, suddenly aware that even a casual gesture from Stark carried its own force. Tony Stark slumped onto the couch, his body sinking into its depths. He shot up in alarm. What the? He felt no pain, just a dizzying, surreal kind of numbness. Before he could collect himself, a calm voice spoke up from behind him. Relax, you're still in the early stages. Tony whirled around. Standing at the edge of the room was a tall man with silver eyes and an aura of ancient power. Who? What are you talking about? Tony demanded. The man's gaze was steady and oddly reassuring. You need to learn to master your new abilities. Research alone won't be enough. You must spend time honing your control, or you risk causing serious collateral damage. Tony blinked. Did you just say abilities? The silver-eyed man nodded. Yes, abilities you barely understand, and you are the only creature so far to join me in the void as my companion. Tony staggered back. The void? Companion? He felt as if the floor might buckle under him. Are you serious? You're the first, the man confirmed. In time, more will come, and we'll share our discoveries as we evolve. Tony ran a hand through his hair, still staring at this stranger. So you're saying I'm the first? Really? The man inclined his head. Indeed. Thank you for stepping forward, Damien Ambalaka. Tony's eyes widened. Damien, that's you? He frowned. Wait, why are you thanking me? Damien offered a small, knowing smile. Among the great minds of history, Da Vinci, Newton, Curie, so many left behind a legacy of brilliance. Yet, immortal lifespans always put a ceiling on their growth. You, Tony, now have a chance to surpass those limits. Tony's heart thudded. He drew a shaky breath, then exhaled with gratitude. I understand. Thank you, Damien. He sank back onto the couch, mind racing. The world as he knew it had shifted. His genius, his inventions, even his lifespan, poised to ascend into something far greater than anything he had ever imagined. Damien Ambalaka considered himself every bit the history-making genius the legends spoke of. He hadn't yet won the world's acclaim or admiration, but he was convinced that his inventions would one day leave a permanent mark. Now, granted this rare opportunity, everything felt different. He could take his time, shape his own narrative, and build his legacy piece by piece. Tony Stark watched him, curiosity sparking in his eyes. "You don't have to be so formal with me," he said. "Feel free to speak plainly. It's only natural that you'd want to find someone who shares your thoughts on evolution." Damien hesitated, then nodded. "And while I may not be your authority on evolutionary theory," Tony continued, "I can certainly tell you which foods to eat and what practices to follow to speed up your own transformation." "That's exactly what I need," Damien replied, leaning forward. "Please, tell me." At that, Tony dropped the last of his courtesy. There weren't any seats, so he simply remained standing, studying Damien with renewed intensity. In Stark's mind, Damien Ambalaka was the very embodiment of the Void's will. Damien himself still had no idea why he'd been brought to Blue Star, but this conversation gave him direct access to that inscrutable power. Tony wasn't about to let an opportunity like this slip away. "There are two ways to evolve in the Void," Tony said. "Let me explain them to you." Damien leaned forward, choosing his words carefully. "There are two basic ways Void creatures evolve. One is by absorbing and devouring other life forms to fuel your own transformation. The other is by adapting to the environment around you." He tapped the edge of the Void Realm console. "And here's the key. The stronger your prey was in life, the faster you'll gain energy, and the quicker you evolve. Animals like cows, bears, tigers, leopards, even the massive fish lurking in the deep seas of Blue Star, all carry enormous life force. But," Damien added with a wry smile, "if you want to avoid a knock on your door from the CCA, our Wildlife Protection Authority, it's best not to pick off any protected species. Stick to beef and pork. They're abundant, unprotected, and still grant you plenty of energy for evolution." He paused, letting the advice sink in. Having dragged Tony Stark into this void realm, Damien was determined that Stark's brilliance not be corrupted into mindless fury. Power without reason was a dead end. Tony Stark sat back, absorbing the strategy. After a moment, he nodded thoughtfully. "So that's your angle. Evolution for profit," he mused. And with that one sentence, the two men sealed an unspoken pact. Power, sanity, and profit, all balanced on the razor's edge of the void. Damien Ambalaka's appetite was legendary. If he didn't have spare cash in his pocket, he'd have no choice but to scrounge for his next meal. He could always resort to theft, but that would blow his cover. Even though his shield is aware of his existence, they've witnessed something in him they dare not expose, his demonic side. Damien leaned back, a faint smile playing at his lips. "I earn money so I can eat whatever I want without drawing attention," he admitted. "That way, I get to enjoy life on my own terms." He chuckled, unconcerned with hiding his amusement.